What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the upcoming Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the upcoming release of World of Warcraft Classic. Today, we've got a huge show for you all as per usual, starting with an extensive call all about the minutiae of Paladin PvE with Theloras, Smiter, and Sonosuke. Then we've got a call with a group of dedicated RP PvPers directed at Blizzard's ears in the hope that they'll reconsider their position on those servers for launch. Then we finish with a great call with Star Mike of World of Warcast, Row of Realm Maintenance, and Alan and Anthony of the Classic Casual podcast about the history and fun of podcasting about World of Warcraft. Now I know some of you will be saying, hey Josh, what gives? No Kevin Jordan. Unfortunately, Kevin was a little bit under the weather this week, so we had to skip our recording session and postpone until this weekend, but don't fret because Kevin will be back to finish off that series very soon. Again, as I mentioned last week, everyone, please don't forget about the quick 30-second survey I need people to fill out over at survey.libsyn.com/countdown to classic. Libsyn is spelled Libsyn. That web address again is survey.libsyn.com/countdown to classic. That helps get some advertising on the show and will help keep Countdown going through the launch of Classic, even though we won't be counting down by then, but let's not worry about the semantics for now. You all know the drill now. This is a community-based podcast, so if you like what you are hearing, join the Discord now and keep the conversations going with over 2,000 of us over there. Follow me on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2, or email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com if you'd like to call into the show, make a suggestion, or just say hi. Everything you'll need is in the show notes for each episode, along with the show's Patreon link if you'd really like to help keep the show going. Or if subscriptions aren't your thing, then you can help keep the lights on at Countdown by checking out the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi. There's also the show's merch store with some great designs over there for t-shirts, hoodies, and coffee mugs and whatnot. So be sure to check those links too. Now with all of that out of the way, let's get into it with Calling Countdown. Alright, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and today we're covering a topic that we haven't got around to for some time in terms of a group call. The show has touched on it, via forum and fauna and things like that, but I was waiting for the call, and here we go. It's time for Paladin PvE. We've done Paladin PvP with Drakova, which a lot of you love, so now we're here to look at the other side of the coin in the PvE environment. And I've recruited 3 amazing paladins who have a shitload of time with the class under their belts. And I'm really happy to have each and every one of these guys here today. I'll start with a show returnee, Theloras. Mate, how you going?
Hello, Elbret.
Good to have you back, mate. I know you've been a bit under the weather lately, but it's good that you're back on your feet and ready to chat some paladins. Now, we've also got with us... No, my pleasure, mate. Always a pleasure. We've also got somewhat of a partner in crime of yours, Smiter. How's things, mate?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good, dude. How's it going?
Good, man. Good. I've heard so much about you, and I'm really happy to finally meet you and sort of get you in on the show. So I'm dying to hear what you and Theloras can have a bit of a back and forth about. So this should be good fun. And we had a last minute sort of addition to the call, who I'm very happy to have back on the show. Mate, you were a first timer last week. You're itching to come back for your second time, and you were so good last week. I was more than happy to get you in on this one. Sonosuke, how are you?
I'm good. Hopefully I can come up with some other good jokes this time.
Yeah, the dad joke. Absolutely. We're looking forward to it. Mate, let's get right into it, boys, and not beat around the bush. As we said, this is Paladin PvE. We're going to be covering all three specs, but just before we get to the specs, I just want to do a bit of blanket coverage about Paladins. Now, guys, please hear me when I say this, and I say this with the utmost of tongue in cheek and love and affection for all of you lads and what you do in game, but I'm going to say this. Fuck Paladins. I fucking hate... Now, the class does not speak to me. Please appreciate where I'm coming from. It's the class I have the least amount of experience with. Now, I know I'm very much so in the wrong here because Paladins are so popular, but I've always personally been like, I have no interest in this class. Theloras, I want to start with you. Tell me why I am so wrong and why you love Paladins.
Well, when I first got Warcraft, back in the day, this would have been 2005. I didn't actually start with a paladin. I started with an undead warlock. But I kept getting pissed off because I would get all these drops that had plate. And I'm like, why the hell can't I wear plate as a warlock? So I re-rolled after about 12 levels and I never looked back. I was on my paladin ever since. I just fell in love with the character going back to Warcraft 3. Even going back further, Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 1, but definitely Warcraft 3, the lore was there with Arthas. I fell in love with the class and I just loved the ability to be able to solo content and progress. And then, as the game evolved, it was always my main, even though I had other, alts. I pretty much leveled on retail one of each class.
Now, Sonosuke, I'll turn to you and I'll get a bit more specific as to why Paladins don't appeal to me. And it's certainly something that you hear around the traps a fair bit in terms that I personally find it to be the least engaging class sort of activity wise, if you will, when you're pulling mob after mob. I just don't feel as, mentally sucked in with the Paladin style of gameplay. Again, tell me what I might be missing and why there's a bit more perhaps to the Paladin class that makes you enjoy it.
Well, for me, I played a Paladin in the beta and then also moving on into starting on the regular game, I started as a Paladin. Unfortunately, I leveled his one-handed prot holy with a shield and I thought I was cool. I was being very Paladin-y. And eventually I got to 60 and then I started leveling my alt rogue and I was like, wow, I can't believe I was able to suffer through that paladin because it was 12 days played versus my rogue, which was 4 days played to get to 60. It was, so for me, leveling and stuff like that, the very start of a paladin was pretty miserable in hindsight, but when I was playing it didn't seem that way. So, it seemed fun. You don't really do a lot. You're kind of just right clicking, but you could heal. And you dealt damage, and I had a shield.
I think if I could just echo that, I think we were too stupid to know any better because we hadn't played any other class. We didn't.
Fair enough. Smiter, I'll ask you to jump on the pile. Can you tell us roughly, could you even be able to gauge how much time you've spent on Paladins? And what is it that keeps you going?
It actually started probably back in 2011. When I joined the Phoenix private server. And, so that's when I kind of first got to somewhat, know about Theloras through his rep paladin guide. And that's what's really got me started was him just reading through his guide. I didn't exactly jump on it at first. I mained a rogue for a couple years, but I had a rep paladin as an alt. And as soon as NOS released, that's when I went full-blown red. I knew what I wanted to do. I was real inspired by Theloras. And I just took over from there, man. And, that's when I actually got to meet Theloras and he was in my guild and we raided together for quite some time. I've been hardcore into the class probably for about 4 years now, somewhere around there.
Too easy. So, Theloras, from what I'm hearing from Smiter and perhaps from all of you, there seems to be a little bit of understanding perhaps where I'm coming from, in that you maybe know why paladins don't necessarily appeal to everyone, but there's still a bit of magic about the class that sucked all of you guys in. And obviously, as I say, it's genuinely surprising to me through the work on the show how popular paladins are. I mean, just presumed for some reason the paladins were one of easily the least popular classes, but they seem to be, sort of mid to upper range. Like people, okay, even if they're not playing paladins, it feels like people talk about them all the time. Do you find, I mean, obviously you're talking about them all the time, but do you enjoy that at least the class gets a lot of discussion, perhaps for the wrong reasons because of what, we're going to get to with the retribution tree? But do you enjoy that at least people are talking about Palings?
Well, part of my love comes from two aspects. Number one, I love the ability to be able to solo, like if you're doing a quest that requires you to kill an elite and no other class can kill it solo but you. I mean, maybe a hunter by kiting it, but that's a big part of why I like the class. On the other side of the equation, I love the challenge. And I've been saying this ever since I first started playing on a private server, kind of like Smiter. I was playing on Phoenix back around 2011, 2012, is I enjoy the challenge because stock Mango's private servers were so horribly bugged. And so we had to literally try and figure out what was wrong in order to fix the class and the spec in particular, just because there were so many bugs. But I mean, I think if I can kind of speak for all three of us, if we wanted it easy, we'd be playing on retail, because Ret Paladins now, I mean, it's stupidly overpowered. I mean, and Prot is even more so because they can solo raid content. So, I mean, I really like the challenge of being able to show other players what we can do and have them go, damn.
Okay, fair enough. Well, look, let's start getting into some of the specs, guys, and perhaps I'll start with that protection spec. Sonosuke, tell me your general thoughts on whether or not the protection spec is as quote-unquote broken as some people say. Now, I think generally, and again, I'll say this as the scrub I am, just having perused the forums, and taking in what people say without actually having played the class, but people obviously seem to accept that, look, there is a role there for prot paladins. You're great in 5-mans, but obviously you fall by the wayside a little bit once you get to raid content, and for the most part, people seem okay with that. Yeah, it would be great if we had a taunt. It'd be great if we could be a prot paladin in raids, but you seem to have somewhat accepted your lot. Tell me if you think the prot tree is fine as is, or if you really think Blizzard dropped the ball with it.
I think it's almost completely garbage for the most part. I leveled as it, specking as prot holy, and it was miserable. Like, I didn't know it was miserable until I played other classes. But prot, terrible leveling. Prot is nearly worthless in 40-mans. You can only really tank in 40-mans as prot if you have a Thunder Fury, and even then you have to do like a lot of shenanigans to be able to tank with it, and it's only select few bosses or trash mobs. That's about it. 5-man tanking, totally fine. It's actually pretty solid, but generally it's only reserved for Sholo and Strath. So you're between those two instances. That's all you're taking. You're not tanking Ubers as a paladin and doing very well compared to a warrior or druid. So for me, I think prot's very underpowered. It's not very good. If you're someone who's like, I want to play a tank, stay the heck away from paladin. Like, trust me, you do not want to play paladin.
One of the interesting things that we're going to test, though, with the Spotus and the Intelligals theory crafting channel, though, is we're going to be testing two-hand reckoning tanking, because the new meta for warriors is fury tanking dual wield in order to increase their threat. So one of the things we're going to be testing very shortly is two-hand reckoning tanking, because if the fury warriors are throwing out their shields in order to do more threat, why don't we? And then we're basically using a sit macro to gain rec charges, and then two-hand boom with Seal of Righteousness up. We want to see how much threat that does.
That probably does more threat, to be honest,
Yep.
but I don't know how. Again, we'll see how the viability of that is. I
Yeah.
doubt it will be viable, but it definitely, it's cool that you guys are going to test that.
Well, I have also seen actual just regular prot, Paladin work in a 40-man raid setting. I mean, even when me and Theo played on Vanilla Game, he was our prot Paladin. We don't like to talk about those times too much, but because the guild, but he was the prot Paladin, and he tanked all the way into AQ40, and it was just, he was taking actual boss ads and everything, even into AQ40. So it can work, but it takes the know-how and the try-hardness to make it work.
Caveat for vanilla gaming, back then, like Blessing of Wisdom was sending out threat, so every 5 seconds, all the magic players were sending out major threat to me. So all of those ads every 5 seconds were getting a huge unblizz-like threat boost. But yes, that is correct. I was AoE tanking.
Okay. Now, Smiter, I might just kick on with you a little bit more. Have you basically, how should I say this? Have you spent not only much time with the prot tree, but also we hear about, these calls for the taunt. Oh, we got it in Burning Crusade. Why didn't we have it in vanilla? Do you think that something as simple, I mean, I know it's a big deal. So when I say something as simple as that, I know it's a huge deal, but do you think that one thing would have basically fixed Paladins in vanilla? Prot Paladins, I should say.
I would say so, because prot Paladins can get defensive capped with pre-raid gear, so that's not an issue. The only really issue is the taunt, because prot Paladins can generate a lot of threat. That's not the issue. They can generate threat without actually having to be the focus target of the mob. But since there's no taunt, and so many bosses require taunt, and that's where it's rough for them.
Well, ironically enough, prior to the Paladin patch in 1.9, our single target threat was actually best in the game with Seal of Fury, because it would do phantom attacks. It functioned kind of similar to Sunder Armor, but basically you could stack melee stats like strength. And so basically you would do an extra 5 or 6 phantom hits that would do no damage, but did the threat as if they had landed. So our single target threat was infinitely better than Warriors, but our AoE threat was absolute garbage, because back then Consecration was the 21 point talent in the Ret tree. So it's give and take, right?
It's funny you say that. I had no idea. I always thought that Consecration was this revered ability amongst Paladins. They were like, that's what makes us at least stand out from the crowd somewhat.
Well, in patch 1.9, it got moved to the Holy Tree and was dropped down to the 11 point. And then in Burning Crusade, it was made baseline, so everyone had it. So it's gone through many different iterations over the course of Warcraft.
Okay. Now, Sonosuke, if you could tinker with anything, and again, as we always say here on the show, we're living in hypothetical land. There's nothing wrong with talking about hypotheticals. No one's going to burn you at the stake for talking about potential changes. We're not begging for them. We're just saying, if we were the designer, maybe we would have done this. If there's anything you could go into with the prot tree and tinker with, what do you think you'd start with?
I think I'd probably gut a lot of just the passive stuff, and I'd make it more splashy, because it didn't feel like you were getting a lot of cool holy abilities that were doing all these crazy things. I don't know, there's so many cool holy things they could have done in every single one of the trees that they kind of didn't do at all. And I would like to see something like that come into effect, where you do some magic damage to it. So you're even more magic damage than some of the times when you're going with ret or something into a rid.
Now, guys, I'll open this one up to the floor. Just to round out on prot paladins and in raiding content, do you feel that there is any space whatsoever for someone to be a prot paladin in a vanilla raid, or that if I know we distinguish between min-maxers and everyone else, of course, the majority of people will tell you play whatever the fuck you want and it doesn't matter. And that's fine. We absolutely encourage that. Play what feels good. But let's suggest maybe more for the min-maxy or try-hard types. If you spot a prot paladin, you're going to be like, what the fuck are you doing? Or is there an excuse for maybe one in a raid?
Well, I actually raided as a hybrid prot with Smiter in a Demaru, but let me clarify that. I was actually a modified rec spec so that I wouldn't have to respec for PvP. And so basically the trade-off was I did 100% nightfall swinging for the guild, but instead of grabbing 1 out of 5 for vengeance in the traditional reckoning spec, I picked up Blessing of Sanctuary instead. And so not only did I swing Nightfall for the raid, I judged Wisdom, and I also put Blessing of Sanctuary on all 40 players. And most people don't think of Blessing of Sanctuary in the traditional raid buffs, but it's actually an incredibly powerful blessing because it basically gives you the ability to put a mini defensive stance on all 40 players in the raid. And then with the added bonus of whenever the main tank blocks, they do extra holy damage as well. So that was my experience.
Now, in a min-max situation, I wouldn't say they would really have a real place. A full-blown prot paladin would not have a place in a pure min-max situation, like you're trying to be top guild on a server. Like I could see something like, just a prot to get Blessing of Sanctuary and then the rest in the holy. And then just have the holy prot mix, tank all the AoE you need to tank, and then heal the rest of the time. That's a really only situation where that would come in, as in a min-max situation. Obviously, in like a more casual setting, it would be more open.
Unless judgment stacking ends up Blizz-like. We'll see.
We shall see.
Good. Could be.
Now, Sonosuke, I'll round out the prot tree with you and just sort of say, number one, did you have anything to piggyback off of what the guys have said regarding prot and 40-man content? And then also, I guess I'll just get you to touch on, I'm presuming from what you've told us, it sounds like you wouldn't necessarily recommend leveling as prot.
No, definitely don't level as prot. If you're leveling, you should always level as ret 100% of the time. Like, I wanted to be like a paladin, so I was like, it's a very like RP build to be like prot holy, and I didn't understand the difference because it was day one of World of Warcraft. Anyways, but so yeah, don't level as prot, bad idea, don't do it. The going to the 40-mans, if you're talking about hardcore guilds, there's a 0% chance you'll see a prot paladin in any of the hardcore guilds. And semi-hardcore, I would also say it's pretty close to 0% you would see a prot paladin. If you do see a prot paladin, like for me at least, I'd question that guild. I'd be like, what are they doing? Like, why would you have a prot paladin? Like, you can argue more for ret in my opinion, once you're back away from that hardcore spot, but we're talking about prot, like, just put a warrior there. Like, a fury warrior is going to do way better than a prot paladin could ever do.
Let's clarify. There is a difference between full prot and leveling as reckoning. Right. Reckoning is actually faster than deep ret because you can maximize by pulling multiple mobs and then mowing them all down using a sit macro.
Okay. Now, the sit macro, that's an interesting one I want to touch on because I've seen this pop up every now and again. And obviously I've read about just, you sit there and you type in your /sit or whatever and you build up all that, charges for the wreck bomb and then you unleash holy hell. Is that something, was that the way it was in vanilla or is that a private server thing? I'm not sure.
It did exist in vanilla, but it was using the delay, the server lag. So, and that I've got confirmation from the guy, the actual paladin who wrote the Reckoning guide.
Right.
And then there are vanilla era videos showing it, but they weren't using an actual sit macro. They were mashing their X button. And so, when you mash your X button, you sit and then if you hit it again, you stand back up. Now, basically what was happening was if you were mashing it fast enough, the mob would hit you and a critical strike would register against you. But if you stood up immediately right after, because of the server lag, the server would think you were still standing, but still register the critical strike, and then you would gain the charge anyway. So it's kind of similar to seal twisting. So it's basically creative use of game mechanics. It's not a bannable exploit or anything like that, no matter what some of my haters or trolls want to say. It is Blizz-like because no one ever got banned for doing it. And so, like I said, I do have confirmation from Bacon, the guy who wrote the Reckoning Guide back in vanilla, that you could do this.
All right.
Now,
yes.
It didn't work on the demo. It did not work on the demo. But there were so many other bugs. We'll have to wait and see until this summer when Classic comes out.
Okay. Now, I'll throw it to you other two to keep this sort of line of thought going, because the next argument is, all right, we've heard from Theloras that apparently it was a thing in vanilla, and we're going to get to rec bombs a bit more when we go, obviously, through the retribution tree. But, well, even though, as you say, sorry, Theloras, you're saying the rec bomb thing, just correct me, it's not a deep red thing, it's a bit of holy and red,
Yeah.
Is that right?
No, well, there's different ways of speccing, but you have to go 25 in the prot tree to get it.
Yeah, okay.
In order to get 5 out of 5.
Sorry, prot. That's right. Okay, fantastic. Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, Sonosuke and Smiter, the question next is, given that it might have been a thing in vanilla, as bizarre as this may seem to say, now it seems to maybe have been indicated at this point, I'm not sure, but do you think Blizzard is considering removing this little trick, if you call it that, from Classic?
Very, very much. Like, I think they have in the back of their mind that they are thinking about it, but this was something that, you know, like Theo said, like, you can confirm, but even though it was a clever use of game mechanics, they, especially with the new outline of how the progression is going to go, it really seems like they're trying to stick 100% authentic. So, in my opinion, I think Blizzard is not going to remove it, but there's always a chance.
Yeah. Sonosuke, I'll just get your opinion on this one because I'm racking my brain now and I don't want to say anything that's going to rub people the wrong way, but I'm really trying to think if Blizzard intimated or suggested or sort of vaguely alluded to something about not wanting one-shotting Kazakh in the game. I'm not going to say that they've said that. Maybe I'm just, I'm having weird sort of forum flashbacks here, but tell me your thoughts on whether you think Blizzard would keep these rec bombs in and have the one-shots of Kazakh in there.
I'm pretty sure they had said something on it, and they definitely are not going to keep that in for sure. That's not going to be part of the game. It was somewhere, I can't remember what patch, I want to say something like 1.5, 1.6, somewhere in that area. I remember when it happened because as soon as it happened, we were like, okay, let's respec one of our paladins to do this, and then they're like, oh, you can't do it anymore. So we were going to use the exploit too.
Yeah. It got hot fixed like literally within 24 hours. So just to be clear, Reckoning, at 1.12, which is what Classic is based on, you can only maintain 4 charges. So at most, when you drop a bomb, you'll hit 5 times. Your original strike plus your bonus 4 strikes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's considerably nerfed compared to how it was when first Kazakh. The other thing is I don't think that they're going to have the other stuff in, because for some reason I want to say it was patched over at some point. It didn't go all the way through till Nax. So whenever that happened, it's going to probably be wiped out because of the 1.12. So I would say conservatively that it's not going to be in Classic at all, this sitting down and stuff or smashing your X. But we don't know that for sure yet, so we're going to have to wait and see. So.
Okay.
Well, another thing is the server software and latency has improved infinitely since 2005, 2006. So it may be in, but it may not. I mean, it could go either way.
All right. Look, with that, guys, we might as well make the segue to Retribution now. There's no time like the present. And Smiter, I'll get you to kick us off with this one. It is a tree that perhaps is discussed like no other in the game. I find it truly fascinating how much discussion we have about Retribution Pallies. Like, I know it seems like it's gone beyond what I would call a meme spec. It seems like it's just a really, look, how do I term this? It's fascinating for some people. It's a joke to others. It's serious business to another crowd. I think the amount of chatter we get about Ret is amazing. Now, I want you to explain to us, how about this? I'll start it nice and easy. Why does everyone want to talk about Retribution Paladins?
The real honest answer to that, as much as I hate to say it, it's because the S-Fan, he actually gave him and Drakova gave Ret huge advertisement in their streams. And, that's when it really kicked off because still in the private server scene, it was like, yeah, you would see a few Rets here, mostly in PvP, not really in PvE. There was a few hardcores, back in like me and Theo. But that wasn't big until S-Fan came along, and then that's when you saw like everybody just want to be a Ret Paladin then. But I mean, S-Fan, I'm not saying S-Fan isn't that good of a player, honestly, but it's just like he did give it advertisement, which is a good and a bad thing because that just means more uneducated, unmotivated people want to play the spec, and just because for a lot of people don't know coming in is that you really have to put in effort like no other to play any off spec, and that's Ret included. So,
Theloras, I'll throw this one over to you, just kicking on from something that Smiter just raised. And I know you have been chomping at the bit to get to an explanation on this one. So you're going to have your forum now. Talk to us about the miseducation, if you will, as Smiter just mentioned himself, about Ret Paladins. What are some of the least understood things about this talent tree that you see getting brought up all the time in the forums that has you shaking your head going, no, that's not how it is? Or perhaps some people get things right. Talk to us about Ret Pallies.
Well, I am but a servant of God, and God wills it.
I do see you saying that a lot.
Yeah, well, that I created that meme. Obviously, if anyone listening has not seen the movie Kingdom of Heaven, the director's cut, watch it by Ridley Scott. That's where God wills it comes from. Deus Vult. Great movie. Great movie.
So I hear it's fantastic, apparently.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the thing to remember is that private vanilla servers, the original version, upon which all private servers are based on, is called Stock Mangoes. And it is bugged to holy hell and back. By far, with the worst class having the sheer number of bugs was Paladins. Everything was bugged to shit. Everything wasn't working. We had one beneficial bug, and this was one of the annoying things that people were spreading disinformation on. Is we did have one beneficial bug. Basically, we had the unnerfed version of Seal of the Crusader, which gave 40% melee haste and a huge attack power bonus. And then when you paired it with Consecration, because it was scaling with attack power, it was a huge AoE boost. And so you could literally not have any spell damage at all, but your Consecration would just hit for ridiculous numbers. I remember I was doing a raid in Zul'Gurub with the Untamed Blade, and I got the 300 strength proc go off while we were fighting the Bat Boss, and so my Consecration ticks against the Bat Ads was going for like 300 each, and it was just insane. But that was bugged. I mean, what are you going to do? So the misconception, though, is we had so many bugs. One of which was the most notorious was Holy Resistance was in the game. And this was this huge several month long debate with some of my worst haters and trolls coming from, what was that? What was that other server? Get the name of it.
Elysium?
No, it was the one where Darkgrasp ran. Anyway, they wanted to initiate Holy Resistance being in the game. And we're like, no, you're full of shit. So anyway, the only way that you can get Holy Resistance is in PvE only, and it's only against higher level mobs due to a level resistance. It's not Holy Resistance per se. So that was one of the biggest things. And then just simply putting together the bug reports, having the developers spend the time to read through it and look at the evidence and say, okay, yeah, this is bugged. Let's fix it. Here you go. And so this has been a progression from Phoenix to NOS to Elysium to Light's Hope to now we're at a point where, yeah, we're looking real good. Like, there's a few little things here and there, but all things being equal, it's as close to Blizz-like as anyone's ever going to get.
Mate, was the server Netherfrost and Zephyr in Twitch chat are shouting out Crestfall? Is that the one you're thinking of?
Crestfall, yes. Crestfail.
Crestfail.
Fail. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Fair enough.
Dark Grasp.
All right. Now, Sonosuke, I'll turn to you because I actually just want to ask. Well, here's what I'll do. We'll get to you, Sonosuke, in a second. Maybe you'll have the answer to this one, but I'll open this one up to the floor. Listener and Countdown to Classic patron Schmige asks the following question. I'd like to know if any of the callers raided back when Blessing of Kings was the 31-point talent in Retribution. This had the effect that every raid was required to have a Ret Pally, even if you didn't always have a DPS role. So I'll open that one up to the floor. Guys, anything to say on that one?
I did. I started raiding Molten Core around patch 1.8-ish. It was either 1.7 or 1.8, and we had one Paladin for Blessing of Kings. And he did 1337 Ret beeps it up. But, it was only one. Now keep in mind, this is also when we only had minor blessings for 5 minutes. And so Molten Core raiding back then was so atrocious because you would spend like a minute to a minute and a half buffing the entire fucking raid. Only have to redo it again 3.5 minutes later.
Well, I mean, I might just quickly go down that tangent while you mention it. I mean, everyone knows about the changing in timing, for Red Paladin, for buffs, obviously, and the difference in, you got a little bit of a reprieve, but not much. Do you guys, you've just mentioned it, Theloras, do you have nightmares of just being the buff bots?
Dude, it wasn't just even that. It was our job to remain out of fucking combat. We had to res people who died. That's why Blizzard put in the combat pulse from bosses and raids to prevent out of combat resing. That's how bad it was. I wish I was kidding.
A 5-minute buffing was pretty miserable. Like we used to bring 8 paladins minimum. Sometimes we'd bring up to like 10 paladins. And you weren't required to buff the whole raid. You were required to buff your group as a paladin when we were doing our raids.
It was so mind-numbing.
Yeah, it was painful. Like, you look back at it, and if anyone who went through that, you're like, oh, you were a paladin back then? Mad respect, bro. Mad respect.
Well, let's round up, guys. Sonosuke, I'll get you to start off on this one. And let's start talking about, in this day and age, in what we know about Ret Paladins. With Classic coming just around the corner, summer is coming, winter is coming, summer is coming. What do you think is the future for the Ret Paladin? We know what the talent tree is going to be looking like. Blizzard has said there are no balance changes coming. You fucking know what you're getting. So, for the average guild, you're a lovely young Ret Paladin and you want to go raiding. What do you think they should expect?
Well, I'll come back to the middle guild. I'll just really touch on high-end guilds real quick for you.
Okay.
If you're going to a high-end guild and you're trying to be a Ret, it's the same as Prot. You're going to get laughed at because the DPS is not high enough. And I know people might say, oh no, the DPS is high enough. No, when you compare like a Paladin DPS to a full like Fury DPS, there's a massive gap. But I also raided with S-Fand in his guild and he raided in guild for private servers. So I've seen people use Ret a lot. And I think in your casual guild, your medium-sized guild, those type of guilds, 1-2 Rets is totally fine. Have fun, be a Ret Paladin, go do those numbers. It's totally fine. I think it adds some almost, some fun aspect to a raid to have a Ret Paladin because people are like, haha, they have a Ret Paladin. You're like, yeah, we have a Ret Paladin. What of it? It's awesome. So.
Well, that's the one thing I've really been wondering about, and this is something that's going to be somewhat applicable to me as well, because I've told people that at the moment, the front runner for me, it's not locked in, but the front runner for me is still rolling as a priest for Classic. And I haven't ruled out being that dickhead who wants to be a shadow priest in a raid. Now, I think this, yeah, I know. And shout out to
Take up 4 debuff slots,
I
you
know.
bastard.
Shout out to Tank as well.
Yeah, go Smite Priest.
Oh, Smite's so,
God wills it.
so boring. But anyway, shout out to Tank, obviously, who's joked recently about rolling a Shadow Priest just for the jokes. But, basically, I see a correlation between the plight of the Shadow Priest and the Ret Paladin a little bit. Tell me if you guys think I'm crazy for saying this, but you've got maybe that, buff that makes you somewhat applicable from a utility aspect, but your DPS kind of sucks and you're just there maybe for the benefit of others and people will somewhat begrudgingly put up with you. But here's the next part of the question is that I watched a video the other day of someone, albeit on a private server, going through Nax on a Shadow Priest and they were near topping DPS charts. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? This Shadow Priest is regularly in the top 2 or 3 and sometimes number 1 on the DPS chart. I couldn't figure it out, but let me just sort of whittle down the question a little bit now. Do you think with every pot, every buff, every great thing going for you, Ret Paladins are obviously acceptable DPS, or it's like it's a joke that you need to have all that shit going on for you to be up there?
It is definitely acceptable DPS. When me and Theo rated on Light's Hope, I was the main DPS paladin, and I was AQ40 geared, and it was some fights, like Patchwork, where I would hover around 10th to probably about 15th, with about mid 500 DPS. But then other fights like Noth, I would be able to get top 5. Thaddeus, I was always top 5.
Oh, you were top 3.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, you were second, I was third that one week.
Yeah, but it's definitely acceptable DPS, but cause right now I'm actually not playing a Paladin cause I just need a break for a Classic. So I actually picked up Hunter on Chronos 3 and it's just, it's crazy the difference between an all spec and a main spec, because the Retribution Paladin is considered main spec sub DPS. And to the degree it is true, the only reason that we were able to push it the way we did is because we knew exactly what to do and tried our hardest blowing hundreds of gold in consumables. But, that was in an average guild. It wasn't a top guild. In a top guild we wouldn't have had a chance. And that's just a matter of fact it is that you just can't pull enough DPS. At least with still a command back, and we'll see how it pans out with still a righteousness and one-handed DPS when Classic.
Well, it's not just with one hand. See, that's one of the things. Here's a shout out to Despotus. He wrote up the Ret DPS Excel spreadsheet and he's got it on the Classic forums and in Talajul's Discord. What's interesting, and this is completely fucking ironic, is the 2 best in slot weapons right now for Ret. I'm going to have you guys seen the sheet? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Otherwise, guess. Countdown, what do you think they are?
Oh, mate, you're asking the wrong person in me.
If I had to guess, are you talking about for the game, so including Nax 40 stuff?
Everything. Just take the
GM weapon?
No, I guess Mom and Hand of Rag or something.
Nope. Nope.
Really? Mom's not one of them?
Nope. Manual Crowd Pummeler and Flurry fucking Axe.
Are you serious?
1 and 2. Yes. Yes.
Wow.
It's haste with as many procs as you can, like Shadow Oil, Life Stealing. Boom, 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 boom.
Wow.
Now, you'll have to farm Nombergon up the yin yang to get it, because you only get 3 charges on each MCP. But when you use it, it's 30 seconds of 1.0 swing speed. And it's fucking insane. This is a shout out also to Exodia, because he did that 1650 DPS video using manual Crowd Pummeler against Patchwork.
Sonosuke, you sound a bit surprised by this one.
Yeah, as far as from all the Ret Paladins I've seen, I've rated with a lot of the top end guilds that have done private servers, and when Smiter was talking, he's like, yeah, I was doing like 500 DPS, or even if you do like 600 DPS, your basic Fury Warrior is still going to pull 900 to 1,000 DPS on that fight. So you're still considerably low. Even that you're playing at your best, you're still considerably lower than a Fury Warrior. So, I mean,
for sure,
that's the trade-off.
For sure. But I was also doing similar, like I'm doing similar DPS as Smiter, a little bit less because I was using Nightfall. So it's all relative, right? Because I was 100% Nightfall swinging, and when you use Seal of Righteousness, Judgment of Righteousness, you have about 40% debuff uptime. So,
if you're using Nightfall, then you have the utility aspect. Then you
exactly
is way different than straight DPS. And then the other thing I'd really want a quick hit on is when you talk about like Ret Paladins, some interesting things to talk about is do talk about Priest, talk about Boomkin, talk about Feral Druids, DPS Feral, not Tank Feral, because those are all kind of the same boat. The one that I'll just say before you guys have the Priest thing I think is worthless, I think Priest is 100% worthless class. I would never have one personally in a casual raid, let alone anything higher than a casual raid.
I don't know if everyone can hear this on the podcast, but that's the sound of my heart breaking.
A Holy Weaver is viable. A Holy Weaver is.
That's what I was going to say.
Dedicated Shadow Priest is not. It is not optimal, nor is it viable because you need serious debuff slots. As I said, at least 3 or 4. Now, one of the other things, like, cause I always compare like a Shadow Priest utility on, say, Thaddeus or Lotheb. I can do a much better job without taking up a debuff slot with 8 out of 8 tier 1, my group heals. See the difference?
Yeah. Sonosuke, go for it. Clean up your point.
Yeah, as I was going to say, is what you do to get the priest debuff of your warlocks is if you have enough warlocks who are good enough that you actually want to get that debuff as one of your slots, is you break the legs of one of your priests and you say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to weave, but you're going to do it as a holy priest. You're going to healing and weaving. It sucks for the priest, but it's the best benefit for the raid. And then again, what Theloras says is you go 8 out of 8 tier 1 for any paladin that you can and have him just be basically redding on Lotheb. And that heals more than any paladin could possibly ever heal on Lotheb as a healing paladin. So
and
there
also
is
on Thaddeus too. Like I've gotten first and second on healing on Lotheb and Thaddeus without casting a single fucking heal.
Yeah, and Thaddeus is a little broken too for DPS because I remember when I was raiding with SFAM, we had a couple times where he would have easily been first DPS if everything had gone right for him and he didn't die and stuff. So there's something with Thaddeus and with Red Paladin that was broken on private servers that's definitely not going to be the same, but I'm not 100% sure what that is.
Okay, guys, look, here's what we'll do because a couple of really good points have been raised. And I want to really hammer this home. We said this before, and Sonosuke definitely said this as a caveat as well, but I just want to repeat it. This is really talking more for those min-max guilds. We're still very much like, play whatever the fuck you want, blah, blah, blah. If it's fun, if it feels good, do it. But we're just saying, if you have aspirations for being the best of the best, these are things to take into account if you are thinking that a top-end guild would consider you as a Ret Paladin. This is just stuff to take on board. So we absolutely know that there is it's not people saying, don't play this class or this spec. It's people saying, if you do, just keep this in mind. Now, I want to throw back to this.
Can I
go
just say one thing? My advice to everyone who wants to try and play Ret is this is the best way to get your foot in the door. Just offer to swing Nightfall. Offer to be that guy. And if you do that, like, for example, when I was raiding with Smiter, in Adimaru, I was the Nightfall guy. And I was always on time. I always came with full consumables. I was ready to raid. I was always there. And when the first Ash Candy dropped for the guild, I got it. It was Luke Council to me. They said, absolutely, let's give it to him. So if you put in the time, you put in the effort, you offer to swing Nightfall for your guild, you get some respect, you'll be given respect.
I just want to be clear, like sometimes when we talk about these specs, the reason I would warn people to stay away from Priest and to stay away from Prop Pally for raiding is because if you want to actually raid and you are one of those specs, there's going to be almost no guilds that are going to want to take you. So you need to make sure that if you're getting into it, you either know beforehand before you start doing that, or that you're on a large enough server where there's a casual enough guild that will take you.
Or
so
at
you have
best,
a higher chance.
Or at best, there's going to be one per guild.
Yeah, and to put it into perspective, if you're a holy paladin, you're basically going to have no issues finding any guild. So and if you're a rec paladin, you're going to have a lot better chance finding a guild than as a priest or a prop pally. So those are like, keeping in mind the percentages. So when you're, as a player coming into this game, you're like, hey, I really want to play in a raid. Try to make yourself, like, play the spec you want to play, but also you need to keep in mind the percentages of you being allowed to be in a raid. So just so people know.
We're about to get to Holy Paladins for sure, but just to round out this conversation on Rets, which has been fantastic, by the way. You've all done such a great job, and I think everyone does understand the angle that we're coming from. Obviously, we're not trying to preach to people what they can and can't do in the game, but Corded in Twitch chat has brought up a couple of amazing points that I think are really important to touch on. And we've alluded to it, but we haven't really hammered it home. And perhaps I'll start with you, Smiter, on this one. Corded says, Red Pallies are acceptable because of the utility. And we haven't really, we all talk about, the meme of big dick deeps and fucking look how much damage I can do and I want to top those charts and blah, blah, blah. But often one thing that gets left by the wayside is that concept of utility. There are other uses for classes. There are those, what we call support classes. It's not all about topping charts. Sometimes you are the bard class who's just there to buff people and whatnot. Tell me why utility is a very, very important thing to keep at the forefront of your mind as well, and why it helps out Red Pallies.
Well, the biggest thing is just because I don't think most people that want to get into Retribution Paladin nowadays, the best thing they have going for them is utility, because they probably don't have the knowledge, the know-how to pull the DPS to be acceptable DPS just as DPS alone, nothing else. And so most Retribution Paladins you're going to see are probably going to be a Nightfall Paladin, that's swinging the Nightfall, buffing the casters, doing what's necessary, whatever the guild needs of them in that moment, But, it cannot get lost, but at the same time, there is going to be a few, Retribution Paladins on there that don't bring utility, but they actually bring the damage. And, and again, but, those are usually the top paladins, and those are usually top paladins in average guilds, because otherwise, you just can't do the same amount of DPS being a hardcore red paladin as you could a hardcore warrior.
Now, Sonosuke, I'll work backwards down the line here. Tell me what the word utility means to you when we talk about red paladins.
Yeah, definitely. And so just so everyone knows more of my background, I'm almost exclusively a holy paladin, so I'm not huge into ret. And it's kind of like a head versus heart. So my heart loves the idea of ret. My head says don't ever do it because of what I can do as a holy paladin. But I love the utility of paladins, period, and this includes rets, because you have things like lay on hands where you can save a tank. You have things like DI, so you can protect against full wipes, so you can res quickly, get another attempt up. You have things where if shit hits the fan, your ret paladin can step out and start healing and helping out. So it's such good utility to have that, and the same goes for feral DPS. It's the same kind of utility. They can shapeshift, innervate, shapeshift, battle res. Like, that kind of utility is so powerful when you're dealing with whatever comes at you, that it's really good, and that's where the value lies, in my opinion. To have that utility.
Theloras, as we get you to round out on this point of utility, one of the things that you raised was, hey, if you want to make up for that deficiency in DPS, you've got, your buff bot and all that jazz as well, but also you could offer to swing Nightfall. Now, one thing that, again, listener Schmige has just raised in Twitch chat, which I think is fair enough to ask, is that, we've heard about the utility that Ret Paladins can bring, but however, it seems like the offer of swinging Nightfall is the only tangible thing that we're hearing about. But what if Nightfall is just swung by another class, which perhaps could be better to bring along? What do you think about that?
Well, we actually went through and tested every single class, a Kef tank and myself. And I created a thread on the classic forums, and we also discussed it at length on Taladril's Discord. Basically, pound for pound, both for individual / personal DPS as well as raid-wide DPS, the best class and spec to swing Nightfall is actually red. Now, the reason for that is a Fury Warrior, for example, has the highest debuff uptime using Nightfall. They get about 50% on average, but their personal DPS goes down the shitter. So on an undead target, for example, like Patchwork, on Light's Hope, we have the top Fury DPS parses from 1500 to 1800 using either misplaced server arms or KT weapons. And then we have the vanilla era video of that Gnome Fury Warrior. I think he ended up at like just shy of 1300 DPS. A Fury Warrior swinging Nightfall, his personal DPS caps at 900 DPS. So that's literally half of what his total potential is. Now, what good is losing 900 DPS from that one player versus a few extra seconds of Nightfall uptime? Now, the second highest class is a melee hunter, and that's when they're mashing their wing clip button. Their uptime is around 45%, but a melee hunter's personal DPS is about a half to a third of my DPS while swinging Nightfall. Their DPS is absolute dog shit.
Okay.
Again, for another few seconds versus me getting 40%. And then the next one down is a Prot Warrior off tank swinging Nightfall. They get about 30 to 35% by mashing their hamstring. But the other side of the equation is that they're doing dual duty because they also should be using Annihilator. So they'll get that up to 3 stacks. Then they switch to Nightfall. And then before the debuff on Annihilator wears off, they got to go back to Annihilator, refresh, rinse, repeat. And the worst class / spec of all is actually Enhancement Shaman. They only get about 20 to 25% debuff uptime. And that's because Wind Fury does not trigger procs in vanilla because it was specifically nerfed by Blizzard. Otherwise, they can only use auto attack and storm strike, which is a 20-second cooldown. So that's why their debuff uptime is really low.
Okay. I should just throw in again as a caveat. You obviously talked about some of the testing that you and KevTank have done. Where were you guys doing that testing?
On the Lights Hope repack, he was doing it against target dummies, and he was doing like extended, multiple, tests over long periods of time. So, and then, we posted the screenshots. We showed the events, and I also backed it up with my own firsthand testing on live server. For when I was raiding. Now, all that being said, the best combination of Nightfall is to have a Retribution Paladin, a Melee Hunter, and the Prot Warrior off tank, because all three combined, I estimate you can maintain roughly 80% debuff uptime for Nightfall, if all three are swinging Nightfall, which is a huge DPS boost. That's plus 15% at 80% of the time.
Now, I'm presuming that just to put it sort of succinctly, I'm presuming that theory crafters like yourself and KevTank are expecting differences when Classic releases, when we get what, the official figures are. Would that be fair to say?
It is, but it's also based on good estimates. For example, on Light's Hope, Nightfall is based on a 2 ppm, and that's backed up by vanilla era source data on multiple different database websites. So I think it's fair.
Okay. Now, Smiter, I'll turn to you for this one, mate, because the second point that Cord had brought up before that I thought was great that I wanted to touch on is this is something that we bring up all the time, but I still think it's worth just actually saying it again, is that final point on Ret Paladins. Cord says a Ret Paladin, well, let's say this, a good ret paladin is still better to bring to a raid than a shitty warrior or rogue. So would you advocate still that the plugged in, paying attention, knows his fucking class inside and out ret paladin is better than the warrior or rogue who's playing on autopilot?
Well, yeah, I can personally attest to that because Cordit was actually my GM. And he's actually alluding to me.
Very good.
But yeah, no, it is because like even like a warrior, let's say you bring in a warrior to your guild and your guild's like MCBWL level, like a warrior that's not going to know what he's doing is, on average probably put like 300 DPS. An engaged ret paladin can for sure top that. And it's just like, they're going to know what to do on everything, how to max everything, how to max the DPS, max their utility if that's what there's needed for that certain situation. Whereas just like a regular like shit warrior is just going to bring shit DPS and nothing else.
Fair enough. Now, Sonosuke, I'll get you to just put in your 2 cents on that final point. Again, would you say you'll take a good paladin over a bad warrior any day of the week, or maybe not so much?
For me personally, it depends on how bad the warrior is. So.
Okay. It depends how drunk they are.
Yeah, like, it depends on where they're if they're hitting if they're more like a 700 DPS, then yeah, I'll take the paladin. If they're hitting that 900 DPS plus, then I'm taking the warrior still.
Alright. Now guys, look, we're getting to sort of the final turn of the call, and Sonosuke, I'll stick with you because you said this is your field of expertise. Let's round out with Holy Paladins. And obviously it's not as sexy as to talk about because they're healers, but hey, there's a lot of healers out there and a lot of people want to hear about it. So you said, Sonosuke, that this is your bread and butter. Tell me what it felt like you mentioned to me that you were one of the original Clothidans. Tell me what you meant by that.
So back in the day, Paladins items at least were everything's plate because you're a paladin. And we were kind of forced into this, you're supposed to wear a plate. If you ever tried dare touching anything else, you would get immediately yelled at by everyone else. You're like, no, you can only take plate. And so when I started doing MC for the first time, we were doing all the server first stuff, so we didn't really know anything about Molten Core because we were the first guild doing it. And when stuff started dropping, I was looking at Lawbringer. I'm like, this set sucks so bad. Why does this set suck so bad? And I eventually got so frustrated, I took off my Lawbringer chest and I bought a green Robe of the Eagle from the auction house, and I just wore that because it had better healing stats. And I'm like, this is what I'm going to wear. I'm going to wear this stupid green uncommon dress because they don't give us the items we need to heal with. So I just wore that. And then eventually I went from that to start wearing actual healing gear. I started taking priest items. I started taking mage items and combining those. And then I eventually amalgamated myself into what I call a Critidin. And then when they started doing we eventually got ourselves ranked up on the websites and stuff. And it finally showed me as one of the few Clothidins in the top 50 paladins. And I was like, okay, cool. That means I'm onto something here. Like, I know what I'm doing. I'm on the right track. And so that's what I did. I was never allowed to take the Nefarian Helm, but I could have if I forced myself to take it because I had the most DKP.
Okay.
But didn't take it. So, but basically that transition from plate to cloth is like one of the main things that you have to try to figure out as a paladin. Most paladins now just start with cloth. They don't even touch plate, really.
Okay. Now, Smiter, I'll ask you, have you spent much time at all with the Holy Tree? You sound like maybe not so much.
I literally have healed like one MC as a Holy Paladin, and I was like, I'm never doing this again.
Okay, fair. Did it just despite what you hear about, if you're gonna roll a pally and you're gonna raid, you've gotta go holy, were you just always just like, fuck that?
I would actually encourage if it's a new player in general, I encourage them as a paladin player to go holy for raiding. Cause that's the easiest spec by far out of the three to learn and to actually do decent in it, and
hey guys,
it would be a great boon to your raid.
Guys, what's a healer?
Well, Theloras, why don't you talk to us about your experience with the Holy Tree, if any?
Well, it's look, don't get me wrong, it's an incredibly powerful tree. And anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. It's just, it doesn't interest me. That's all.
Yeah.
If I were to ever force myself to go holy, I would go holy wreck. I wouldn't go all the way down to holy shock because that's a lackluster ability. But I would go holy wreck myself. So 26 points in the holy tree, 25 in prot. And because you can still one-shot bitches in PvP, you're an AoE tank motherfucker. You can still heal incredibly well for PvE raids. But all that being said, I think the most efficient / effective use of a ret paladin who can heal is 8 out of 8 tier 1 in either the tank group or the warlock group for those group AoE heals. Cause that is just off the charts. So efficient, so effective, and also while swinging Nightfall. But that being said, I do agree Sonosuke tier 1 stats are stupid as fuck. And I hope and I pray that when Classic launches, we get the original stat itemization for tier 1, which is actually quite good for overall for prot and ret. Because it's got loads of strength, loads of agility, it's got crit, it's got dodge, it's got hit, and shield block.
Well, Sonosuke, I'll get you to pick up from there because, mate, it sounds like obviously you're going to be the one who's clearly got the most experience with this spec. Now, I'll maybe open this one up very generally. We often, well, not often, but sometimes people say, what's the best healer in the game? If I were to simply just try and knuckle you down to that one very narrow question and go, Holy Paladins, best healer in the game, true or false? What would you say about that?
I would say true, but with the understanding that tanks matter. And the reason I say that is because a Holy Paladin who knows what they're doing will never have a tank die on them unless the tank forgets their Shadow Flame cloak on a mob that Shadow Flames. Whereas a priest, you can have things go awry as a priest because you don't have the reliable 1.5 seconds repetitively. Paladin, you can literally, this sounds really boring, and this is going to sound really boring to your listeners, but here's how I assign I'm also one of my tank healers, so I assign myself because it's boring. You put paladins on tanks, and you say, okay, your job is to just press your key that says Flash of Heal. That's all you're doing for this entire fight. If your tank drops, you lay on hands. That's all you do. And so, as a paladin, your tank will never die. It protects the tank, and your other healers can have all the fun doing all the raid healing and stuff. But as a paladin, you're the best healer there is in the game for just solo targeting one person and keeping them alive. So that's why I would say they're the best. And we can all agree that druids are the worst. So unfortunately, druids, it's worse. You're worse. Priests can generally output more healing, as long as you take away, Judgmental Light. Okay. So.
Let me put this to you though, given what you've said, I've sat down, I've watched the videos of a Holy Paladin's point of view of a raid, and tell me if I'm wrong in saying this, but it was summed up by flash of light, 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 flash of light. It looked like the most boring fucking gameplay I've ever seen in my life. Is there more to it than that?
Yes, but not at a basic level. That's what it is you're just casting flash of light. So, the caveat to that is, when I'm a raid leader, so when I'm raid leading, I'm flash of lighting, but I'm also keeping my eye on everyone's mana pool, everyone's health pool. And if I need to DI someone, I DI someone. If I need to lay on hand someone, I lay on hand someone. And if I need to bop someone, I bop someone. I'm always keeping my eye on what's going on. And then I'm also calling out, hey, let's be-res that person, innervate this person, yada, yada, yada. So it depends on what your role and situation is. But for most paladins, it's going to be, I'm spamming flashlight and I occasionally lay on hands. Sometimes you might do your crit heal on top of a big ass holy light just to pump someone, but you're not going to really do that very much. You're just kind of casting flashlight. I'll be honest, if you're getting into Holy Paladin, you're casting flashlight a lot. And I see a listener saying something about changing your rankings of flashlight. The only 2 ranks of flashlight you ever want on your bar is max rank and then you put rank 2 on there because of how your mana gets put back onto your bar. And so you keep rank 2 on there. If you go you just cast rank 2, and then you just sit there on rank 2. It sucks, but you'll always get your mana back, and you can always cast rank 2.
All right. Now, Sonosuke, I'll get you to finish this one up. You've already mentioned one thing. Are there any other friendly words of warning or a heads up that you'd throw to any player who's considering playing Holy Paladin in endgame content for the first time?
Be vocal about what you want as a Holy Paladin going into endgame content. It's not overly difficult. Paladin's one of the easier classes. It's one of the 3 or 4 easiest classes if you're a Holy Paladin to play endgame content. Some other ones are like Mage is really easy to play, things like that. But as far as Holy Paladin, if you really want to actually like get ret items and you want to like say collect your 2.5 gear, you want some two-handers, make sure you're vocal to your leadership about that. Say, hey, even though I am healing, I really want these items for PvP or to do dungeons and stuff. So please consider me for those. So don't be shy about that kind of thing. Any good leadership's going to listen to their players. So make sure they take
unless you're in Remnant.
Well, you're gonna have to explain that joke to me.
That was the guild. That was the guild that fucked me over on KT.
Oh, right. I remember that one. Yeah,
that's funny. I actually rated slightly with that guild too.
Oh,
it's too
you
brutal.
know what, dude? Smiter was smart. He quit when shit was getting bad. He got out. I stayed for too long with those shitters.
Important note to bring up here is I know a lot of what we've been talking about here throughout the whole podcast has been like Nax level stuff, like T3 in game, stuff.
Yeah.
Things change, obviously like a Ret Paladin is going to be more valuable in the earlier stages, and like MC and BW Whale before ZG comes out and casters get good, and it changes, but we've been talking about the in-game stuff.
But Smiter, didn't you get the memo that we're all going to Nax when Classic comes out?
Oh,
Nax is Lich King. Nax is Lich King.
Mate, everyone's been there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Smiter brings up a good point there. Like, something else I should add in about Holy Paladins is not just how you just cast Flash of Light, but understanding that if you actually are someone who wants like a lot of epics, or you're like someone who like really likes the idea of getting raid gear, Holy Paladin is not a class where you get a lot of raid gear because it's actually pretty worthless for you. For the first like third of the game, the entire longevity classic, you are literally going to be in blues and greens. Like that's
just it. That's just it. If you're holy, you want dungeon 5-man blues. You don't want fucking Lawbringer. It's useless to you, like you were saying.
And tier 2 sucks. Tier 2.5 sucks for holy. Like the tier 3 is where you're like, oh my gosh, a healing set. What?
Yeah.
So just be in mind, if you're a Holy Paladin, it's going to be a lot of like 5-mans. You're not going to get a lot of like physical rewards out of playing Holy Paladin. You're just going to get, it's cool, I down this content reward.
And even if you do, you're going to piss off the casters. Why are you taking my Mage Blade, you bastard?
All right, guys, look, with that, let's round it out here. I can't thank all of you enough for spending the last hour plus talking about Paladins so in depth and at such a sort of high level. I really do appreciate it, and it's having listeners like you that makes the show what it is. I'll go through you all one.
We have a late edition. Despotus.
Oh, yes. Sorry, you're right. You're exactly right. Sorry, I do want to get 5 minutes. Hey, Despotus, how are you, man?
Pretty good.
Sorry, I just want to set this up. Sorry, we do have a late addition to the call, and I just want to get the last 5 minutes or so of the call with Despotus, because Theloras tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, I've got the actual author of the chart that I was talking about earlier on the line. So, Despotus, thanks so much for joining us, and talk to us a little bit about the work that you've done with Paladins.
Yeah, so, I don't know. There's not a whole lot to say other than just, essentially what I've tried to do is, so with a lot of the other classes that you look at, primarily stuff like rogues and fury warriors that are considered the kind of canonical top-end DPS, there's been a lot of really heavy theory crafting work that's been put in to try and best optimize the amount of gear that they have, kind of balance the stats on different stuff. And this is usually through some sort of like theoretical model to look at, swing speed on auto attacks, attack power, how this scales with the strength of their abilities so that you can really fine-tune your performance.
They also weren't bugged as fuck either.
Well, there's that too. That makes it a little more complicated. But for a lot of the classes, especially the kind of less popular hybrid classes, there's really not anything around like that. So there's been nothing that you can do to plug in a set of gear and try and get DPS estimates out for something like a Ret Paladin.
Well, I'll let you round us out and basically give you a bit of a platform here to talk about Paladins in general. And I'd ask this question of you. What are your hopes and dreams for Paladins coming into Classic? And given that we've got all these years of private server play behind us, people have had the time to learn the class inside and out. We know the numbers aren't 100% in private servers. We get that, but you've definitely learnt more about Paladins. What do you hope to see happen for Classic? What do you think people will come to realize about the Paladin class?
So I think at this point everybody knows kind of the role that a Holy Paladin fills, but I would hope that moving forward, kind of as has been talked about on the show so far, with some kind of optimization to find the best niche for a Ret Paladin to fit into a raid, or even a Prot Paladin for maybe guilds where that suits them for, say, AoE tanking or something. That given a sufficiently knowledgeable player base, people could find a niche to use Ret Paladins in a raid the same way kind of Feral Druids have caught on in recent years, instead of blacklisting them in a way of like, this is the class that's not allowed to raid. Given that we've got some tools available to try and optimize their performance.
Well, what's been the most surprising thing that you've discovered about Paladins through your work?
Honestly, I think what Theloras pointed out earlier, that Crowd Pummeler is deceptively strong on a Paladin.
And the
it's
Flurry
way better than you
Axe.
think.
Like, what level is MCP again? Is it 29?
Yeah, it's Nomergan, so low.
Yeah, it's something like that. Like that, something you can farm at ad nauseum is the best in slot weapon, better than anything else in the game. Like, that's just crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, guys, I don't want to drag this out too much. Look, I'll have to extend this invitation basically and just say, I know you've been a very, very late addition to the call, but Despotus, if you'd ever like to call in again for a short period of time and go over some of your work, I'd be more than happy to have that chat with you. But thanks so much for dropping by now and saying hi. I don't want this one to drag out too long, so I might wind it up now, and I'm just going to say a big thank you to everyone. Despotus, thanks for dropping in. Smiter, Sonosuke, Theloras, you guys have been great. I just wanted to say thank you again and hope to talk to you again in the future.
God wills it. All right. Later, guys. Thanks for that.
Yep. Thank you. Later.
Take care.
Coming this week on my other podcast, The Cinephiles, we cover the year 2000's American Psycho.
But how's the former Bale when he's running down with the shoes, running nude down the...
Has he got shoes on?
Yeah, he's got sneakers. No, he's got sneakers on.
I didn't see that.
I thought he put sneakers on.
Oh, it's a power move, shoes and nothing else, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's how I travelled around
during
India.
your power walk.
And again, back to the fantasy element.
Nothing to see here, ladies.
That's a pretty horrific...
If you'd like to hear more from the Cinephiles, then please do log on to cinephiles.com. That's SINNERFILES. Or search for the Cinephiles on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. But now, let's get back to Countdown. Alright, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and we have a boatload of people in on this one for a special call covering an important topic about things that we've heard from the blue posters and also obviously some of the developers on Twitter about what's happening with World of Warcraft Classic regarding role-playing PvP servers. And I want to start by throwing out a big welcome and a big thank you for organizing this to Halwin. How are you, mate?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing really well, mate. Thanks so much for all the effort you've gone through to gather this band of players together to talk about their experiences on role-playing PvP servers and why Blizzard should reconsider their stance on having some of them available at launch. And we'll just go through everyone real quick. Deathwatch, how are you, mate?
Fine, thank you. Yourself?
Very well. And Sirtruk, am I saying that right?
Yep.
And Takk.
Yep.
and Undua. And obviously some of you might recognize Undua from the classic WoW subreddit, but he's here on his own today representing, some of his thoughts about, his love for RP PvP servers. Undua, how are you, mate?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good to have you here. Now, Halwin, I'll start with you and talk about, let's go back to a moment in time that wasn't that long ago when Blizzard came out and said that they were not going to offer RP PvP servers on the launch of Classic. Now, this is something that many of us just thought was a foregone conclusion, but they came out and said nay. Now, was this a little bit of a knife to the heart for you? How did you feel when you got that news?
Oh boy. The first thing I responded, and I remember that clearly, was like, this is a joke, right? And then I was silent for a bit. I'm like, right? This is a joke, right? And then I saw the video. I was like, oh boy. So I'm the GM of one of the largest RP PvP guilds for Classic right now. And if we don't get such a realm, it would fracture our guild. And that's like the first thing that popped into my mind, right? Like, how are we going to manage this? What are we going to do? And that's why we are making noise and hoping Blizzard will listen to us so we can get an RP PvP realm where we will have the best classic experience possible, and also, to keep our nice community in the guild.
Now, Deathwatch, I'll turn to you and ask for your reaction to that news, and also follow up with, what's the chatter amongst the community been like since that news dropped?
So, within the community, it's roughly been, in terms of from the officer side of it, just because me being a fellow founder alongside Halwin, is that there's been a lot of talk and chat within the officer core, and kind of like, okay, how do we plan things out? What are the countermeasures we can put in place, and what actions can we do in terms of a leadership side and a formal side within the larger community? And then also handling our members' concerns, because they're asking, what's happening, guys? Can we have a heads up just in case, so we know if we're going to, if they're going to if we're going to look to take them to RP servers or our PvP servers or PvE servers if we don't have RP PvP being available. So it's been quite like a high pressure period of time where, especially as my particular role is generally handling grievance concerns, I've had to whip Halwin into line a few times, and because Halwin gets a bit stressed, so it's my job to make sure we as a group of founders stay functioning and work together.
Fair enough. Now, Sirtruk, let me ask you, people might push back, when they hear, obviously, RP PvP players coming out and crying out for servers, saying, this is unfair, Blizzard, come on, what skin is it off your nose just to give this to us? You've had it in the past, why wouldn't you do it again now? If people was to say to you, guys, just go play on another server, what's the big deal? What would you say to that?
I would give them the same response that they would probably give me if they were unable to. I was telling them just do dungeons or, just go PvP.
Yep.
It's a kind of end game for people who get really invested in it, an end game in of itself to pursue.
It's certainly a different play style that I think, we warmly embrace that play the game how you like kind of ethos. And Takk, I'll ask you, what is it that drew you to RP PvP that you feel those servers offer that you can't get on other servers?
Well, when I compare it to RP PvE servers or just regular PvP, you always have something that's lacking. When it's PvP, just a regular PvP server, it's just this flood of trolls, because I had an RP guild on Saurius back in the day. No, on Elysium, sorry. And we tried to do this event, but I made a mistake of announcing it in World Chat, and that really ended badly. It always ends badly when you do that. But then the downside from RP PvE is that it blocks off many possibilities that you would, can't incorporate World PvP into your RP events anymore because it's locked off. And that's what really hurts my imagination and my possibility to organize stuff.
Undua, have you ever tried to get involved in RP on a realm that isn't an RP PvP server? and found that it's just too hard, or you haven't tried that before?
I have. I've tried it on private servers where I found that the experience is significantly better than on retail servers, because on private servers there isn't an RP server unless you want to go into a dedicated role-playing server. So you get a lot of players like myself who enjoy RP as a sort of secondary pastime in the game. It's what they do between dungeons. It's what they do between leveling. It's a little break. And they still want to RP, but there's not an RP server, which is actually still a gameplay server, if you know what I mean. And that's great, but on retail, I never found that to be the experience. I would wander around Orgrimmar for days on a PvP server that I'd come back to after I'd quit. And frankly, you would wander around for days with your RP add-ons all flagged up so everyone can see you're an role player. I would see a handful of other people maybe using it, but none of them, if you approach them, were interested in role-playing because they had those add-ons for other servers where they would have a role-playing alt that they'd go around and RP on.
Okay.
It's frankly impossible in my experience to role-play on a non-RP server. You can designate one as a community, but it does cut out new players from joining in.
Okay.
Because they don't know that the RP.
Let's have a bit of fun, guys, and let's presume that I am Ian Hazakostas for a second. I have, announced this news. I'm the one that you would necessarily want to talk to perhaps interact with and voice your concerns with and ask Blizzard to reconsider. So Halwin, I'll start with you and just say, what would you say to me initially, straight off the bat? How would your argument go in terms of asking Blizzard, please reconsider this decision?
Right. Well, I would tell him to look at the facts and figures to start with. So it was a couple of months ago, there was a poll on the Classic WoW subreddit, which about 20,000 people have completed. And it asked what type of realm people prefer to play on. And 7% indicated they wanted to play on an RP PvP realm. Now, of course, we all know that is a minority, but 7% would still be thousands of players from the total player base that will play Classic. And I think that is enough to warrant to have one RP PvP realm. And I don't think it would die out anytime soon either.
I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but people might call me crazy, but I feel like I've been relatively conservative with my guess for how many people are going to jump into the waters for Classic. I mean, when you say, it's going to be thousands or tens of thousands of people that might want to roll RP PvP servers because of that percentage, let's say it is somewhere between, 6 to 10%. Well, I mean, I'm guessing about 1 million people are going to try out Classic. People can call me crazy if they want, and I feel like I'm being super, super conservative when I say that. So I think it's absolutely tens and tens of thousands of people that might have been interested in RP PvP. So, Deathwatch, I'd ask you, does that sort of sing to you in any way, or do you think it's slightly lower?
In my view, it's quite hard to predict because we can take from quite close communities what their viewpoint is, and obviously, while yes, there's with polling you can get a rough guideline based on a certain number of sample size. It's going to be a hard job for Blizzard to make a decision in the matter of that. Okay, they can look at a poll here, but is that necessarily correct? Because then they've got to convince their marketing side and anyone else who's got other hands in the pie, so to say, to allow them to do things. Because if they want to do servers, I'm sure there's going to be someone up high that's going to be, doing as normal, playing with things and not knowing everything in the world.
Sirtruk, let me say to you again, let's pretend that I am Ian and I'm talking to you and I say, hey guys, look, we're not saying we won't do it at all. We're just saying maybe later down the track. So, get your character started up on a server, have your fun, and then maybe we'll organize a realm transfer later down the track and then all you RP PvPers can get together later on. Do you think that is a narrow-sighted view, or would you say, that is actually maybe fine in the long run?
I think it presents the same existential question we have regarding whether RP PvP guilds would roll, regular PvP guilds or RP PvE guilds right now. if whenever RP PvP servers are introduced down the line, it would still present the question of, are you invested in your current server's community, or do you take the chance to transfer somewhere else?
Okay. Takk, if I were to suggest to you that there's the possibility, even though, look, they've alluded to the fact that it may come later down the track, but if you were to find out that it were never happening, how would that affect the way in which you approach Classic?
I would just probably, I would look for the community, where it, chooses to manifest. What if they, choose like one specific PvP server and make it the unofficial RP PvP server? I would probably be active there, but I would just have to, well, at first I wouldn't give up, but then after a while, if it's never coming, I would just have to live with it, I guess, and just, do it. I mean, just do what I have. Just, when life gives you lemons, you know?
Undo, to sort of change tact a little bit and let's get a bit more positive. I know I've been a bit grim to start with because obviously we're asking for something that hasn't been the case yet, but if I were to say to you guys, and I'll get all of you to start thinking of stories that you might be able to share as well, and we'll go through you one by one, but we'll start with you, Undoer. Are there stories that really stand out at the forefront of your mind when people ask, well, what is so fun about RP PvP servers? Why do you guys love it so much? Are there things that you've experienced? Are there instances of the game where you've had really memorable moments that make you stick to those kinds of servers? What are your best memories?
I've got to own up here because I've actually never played on an RP PvP server. I've only ever played on PvP and RP and PvE. And I would like to play on RP PvP because there are two experiences as opposed to some experience that makes RP PvP so special. And one is the open world PvP that you can only ever get on a PvP server. And it has become almost synonymous with classic WoW. You know, all of the ridiculous memes that we get out of STV and Shimmering Flats. I think that's fantastic, and I enjoy that, and I enjoy that gameplay, and I enjoy role-playing. And like I said earlier, I don't believe that you can roleplay effectively on a non-RP server on retail when RP servers are available. And I want to do both. I don't want to have to choose whether or not I get to roleplay or whether or not I get to PvP in the open world. Especially if Battlegrounds aren't going to be in from day one.
Can you think of any moments outside of that, let's say it's just on a straight up RP server, that have really made you fall in love with role-playing?
Again, that's probably more of a sort of long-term thing for me. It's the storylines that are produced with people. There were some fantastic role players, well, fantastic people that I role played with. Fantastic role players sounds a bit mad, but meeting up with people and sort of planning to have our characters run into each other in Deadwind Pass and have what was essentially just acting out to absolutely no one but ourselves, have that event in Deadwind Pass in Ajara, you know, explore the open world in a immersive and engaging way.
Halwin, how about you? Is there a story that shoots to the front of your mind as like, this is why RP PvP servers or RP in general is amazing?
Absolutely. It was one of my first events, actually, that really made me see the game in a whole different way as well. And I'll try to keep it brief, but it started out, there was like 5 or 6 of us, and part of the story was that we had to rescue somebody's brother in Stone Talon Mountains. And so we set out there, and we wanted to first regroup and discuss our strategies in some cave somewhere. So we cleared it out, but, you know, it's PvP realm, right? So, we encountered some horde players as well, which of course had to be taken care of.
Of course.
And, of course. And, you know, they weren't that happy with us. They wanted to quest and level. So they brought their mains, they brought their friends, whatever. We got a lot of 60s on us, and a large battle ensued. And, at some point, it just started growing and growing. It escalated. We asked ourselves the question, like, are we still going to be rescuing their brother, or are we going to fight for the Alliance? And we had some fun discussions about that, but at the end, maybe like half of the realm was there in Stone Talon Mountains fighting. And I remember at some point I had to log off, and like 4 or 5 hours later I logged back in and the battle was still going.
Wow.
And what's important here to remember is that would have never happened if it was not for that RP event. That's what it all started with. Somebody wrote me a message like that. Let's just walk around Stone Talon Mountains killing lobies. I'd be like, no thank you. So yeah, it's just a very nice excuse sometimes just to goof around in the world, and crazy stuff just starts happening naturally.
I definitely like the concept of that kind of, make your own battleground. Definitely. But, I'll turn to you, Deathwatch. Any stories for you that, are a bit of a love letter to role-playing or RP PvP servers?
So, I ended up quitting WoW in late TBC. So, most of my experience, because I started originally on PvE, was either through kind of like the hybridization of roleplay, because I started playing the game when I was very young. So my role coming into roleplay came from my family and my father, and then as I've gone through other games and other MMOs, I've slowly moved more into the genre of looking at RP PvP. So to me, my experience comes from other games, but also kind of like what I see as the thrill. And that thrill is the option of choice for other players and yourself. So the idea of that, for me, I can choose to assist someone from the other faction, because at that point in the timeline of the game, it's sort of more of a Cold War, at least from how I've always understood the lore. And that I can choose, I could go, okay, this person's fighting Scourge, I can go and help them. And okay, it might come and bite me in the backside and when they stab me in the back, but hey-oh, that's the choice you make. And it's about having fun stories, like on my PvE server back in the original game, I had my riding turtle at the start of TBC when obviously loot cards were available to collect, and I named it Shelley, and I had all sorts of laughs on Bronzebeard's EU going on about my riding turtle, and obviously Speedy, the little Children's Day pet.
All right. Sirtruk, how about you? Anything that stands out?
I've played much more on RPVP on retail. And the story that always sticks out in my head when I talk about like why this is important is this was Emerald Dream and Mists of Pandaria, and I was in an all-orc RP guild, and every Friday we'd hop on wolf mounts, put on Wolfhelm Transmog, and we'd just ride around on ground mounts and look for people to fight us, and more often than not, people would come out to fight us, not just to PvP and kill Horde, but to create a story on the spot. And even on our side, it created stories. We were all orcs. Only 2 classes of orcs can be healers, and we had to decide, are we going to give in and invite some blood elves, or are we going to stick to just being orcs or not?
Takk, how about you?
For me, just it makes me think of I had an event that was eerily similar to the one Halwin experienced, but it was with my own guild, something I organized. And it was just we were I don't know if you remember it, Hal. We were what was the quest again? We needed to gather some information from Razor Hill, and we went with a party of I think 6 or 7 people to Razor Hill, where we mind controlled one of the NPCs to make him spill the beans, you know. And I really remember that fondly because there were these low level orcs watching us in fear. It was like we were breaking into some foreign country. They're like, whoa. And it's just something. And also people came to fight us, and we had to flee to the I don't know what, it's like this human stronghold, a few meters up, like down south. And it's, that whole experience, the PvP, the danger, it all connects it together, I think. I think it's quintessential.
Okay. Guys, I'm going to open this one up to the floor, first in, best dressed, and I just want to explore a little bit more about, the kinds of people that make up RP PvP servers. Appreciating Undoer, you've said you don't have much experience there, but the others might. In terms of do you find the greater population really does throw themselves into it, or do you find that there are tourists who make it a bit annoying for the diehards? If there are, there's meant to be PvP on the server, do you find that everyone really does get involved in the PvP, or that, funnily enough, PvP takes a bit of a back seat on RPP PvP servers, like sort of less so than a regular PvP server, if you know what I mean? What's been your general experience in terms of the people that make up the server on the whole?
In short, I'd say they're a lot more mature. I've played on various types. I've actually played on all 4 types of realms in the past. Well, I don't have any figures of the average ages, but I mean, generally speaking, my experience with people was a lot more positive since they're less toxic. I have very little experience with griefers, whereas that was a very big issue on PvP realms. So yeah, mature is what I'd say.
Would you guys back that up, saying, yeah, generally the demographic does feel just that little bit more mature?
I think the best thing to say in regards to that is it comes down to how the community is formed on each server, because every server is unique. Like, we've seen examples constantly about how when they ended up merging servers, they merged a server where always throwing need on anything that came up on the read was the norm on one server, and the other server, they were like, what the heck's going on here? And it's down to how the community forms. And if you haven't got good people forming a community, or how the community is first formed, then it will affect the community in the long term. And that's the key thing about Classic WoW for everyone, I'm sure, is that the community is important. Each server is unique. Like, they're never going to be a clone of each other, and you'll never get the same as your old server back in the day, but it's a new experience and new fun.
All right, guys, we'll go on the home turn here, and Undoer, I might start with you and just say once again, if each of you were to get your moment alone with the Blizzard representative and say, look, this is your pitch as to why they should do it. This is what they should hear from the community. This is what they perhaps don't understand about the community, or why they should consider just lock off that one. All we're asking is one server, just do it. What would you say?
Personally, I would say there are experiences you cannot get on other servers. If you want to enjoy both PvP and RP at the same, open world PvP and RP, you need to either have characters on 2 servers or an RP PvP server. Players like us who want to engage in both of those parts of the game currently don't have a home.
All right, Takk, how about you?
Actually, I think I'm kind of on the same page with Endure here. It's just, and also I think which something that has to be mentioned is that there are going to be RP PvE servers, and in general, those are a lot less popular. So I don't know why RP PvE isn't too niche and why RP PvP is, for example. That's also something I would say to them if I get a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So, Truck, what would you do with your chance?
Oh, I would mention that it's all a matter of community, and even through the life of retail, RP PvP servers have had that same sense of community. And for what we want from Classic, it'd be really good to double down on that.
Deathwatch, how about you?
So what I might say might obviously make some people go a bit, but what I would say is that every community deserves the same, like every server community deserves the same chance to get started as everyone else, which is why our PvP servers need to be at the same time as every other server, not started late. And okay, if they fail, they fail. And then Blizzard can turn around and say, you think you do, but you don't.
Halwin, let's end it with you, mate. One final big push, that big pitch. This could be what sways them. What would you say?
I'd reiterate again that there are thousands of people who are interested in these types of realms, and that it's very important for us because it's another reason to log into the game. Because let's be frank, there isn't that much to do in Classic. There's no battle pass, daily quest achievements, and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, I'm very happy that Classic doesn't have all that. But besides, we don't want to be raid loggers. We need that RP to be fully engaged in the game. So please, just give us one realm.
This is our downtime activity, essentially. This is what we do between playing the game
more than fair enough, guys, and very well put. Well, look, you know, we know that Blizzard employees listen to the show. Hopefully they pass along the message to the people that matter. I'll be rooting for you guys. I really do hope that they reconsider this position. You know, I think that it's more than fair. And so, look, hopefully there is some movement on this issue. We shall see. But I just want to say a big thank you to all of you for taking the time out to get in on this call today. And I hope obviously people that, you know, as we said, anywhere between 6 to 10% of the playing population that wants to do what you're doing, agrees with you and voices their concerns to Blizzard as well. So thanks again to all of you. I'll just say goodbye individually. Deathwatch, thanks so much, mate.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sirtruk.
Thank you.
Thanks, Takk.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Undoer. It's great to talk to you again, mate.
Thank you. Thanks for your time and thanks for hosting us.
And Halwin, thank you so much for putting this all together and organizing it, mate. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, Josh.
Hi everyone, Josh here. I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that while Countdown to Classic will always be a podcast you can get for free, if you do happen to really enjoy the show and find yourself always coming back for more, then please do check out the show's Patreon page to see how you can help keep the lights on at Countdown to Classic and even vote on show content as the show continues to bring you more and more classic WoW goodness. Alternatively, if monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can always visit the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi, with that link being in the show notes and on the website too. Now, let's get back to the show. Hey everyone, I'm about to fire up the call with Star Mike, Ro, Alan and Anthony all about podcasting WoW, but as I do that, I really do encourage everyone to check out their shows as well and the great work that they do there. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that I've enjoyed greatly for many years, and there are so many great options out there, so please do check out World of Warcast, Realm Maintenance and the Classic Casual amongst others as alternatives for your podcast fix and help support an ever-growing gaming podcast community. Now, let's hear the call. Alright, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and a very special call today with lots of people on the line. I am so happy to be speaking to everyone here. This one's it's been waiting in the wings for a while. We've organized this over the last few weeks and I'm happy that it's finally happening. A few people to get through with the introductions. So let's start with a very special guest, Star Mike of World of Warcast. Thank you so much for joining us here on Countdown to Classic.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, mate. And joining him, we've got another legend of the scene, my buddy Ro of Realm Maintenance. How are you, mate?
Doing great. Thank you for having me on, man.
It's an absolute pleasure again. And joining these two veterans, we've got two newbies to the podcasting game. We've got Alan and Anthony of the Classic Casual podcast. Alan, how's things, bud?
Great, man. Thanks for having us, Josh.
It's great to have you here, and your co-host, Anthony. How are you, mate?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself, Josh?
Doing very well, mate. Very excited for this one. Now, look, if you're listening there at home, the reason we've got everyone here is, as you may have picked up on, we're going to be covering everything and anything podcasting WoW, or podcasting Blizzard products, if you will. Just everything podcasting in general. And we've got the two veterans and the two rookies and myself somewhere in between, and we're just going to have a little bit of a trip down memory lane, if you will, and a bit of a laugh over what it's like to cover video games in the podcasting format. So, Mike, I might start with you because you're kind of where this all started, this idea for this call, because a listener reached out to me on Twitter recently and said, "Hey Josh, do you happen to know what the first World of Warcraft podcast was?" And I wasn't sure, so a little bit of quick Googling and with the research under belt, I got back to them and I said, "Look, it's hard to say, but it looks like there's two front runners here, and they were WoW Radio and World of Warcast." And a lot of I found a wiki entry or something that said World of Warcast was actually the first World of Warcraft podcast, but I can't be 100% sure, but you're definitely right up there. So I might just ask you for any kind of clarification you can give us. What do you remember?
Well, WoW Radio was around. However, the difference is that they would call themselves a radio show. They made it very clear that they were not a podcast.
Right.
There were very many posts where it's like, we are not a podcast. So if you want to look at it that way, we were technically, by their own admission, the first WoW podcast.
And that's what I was thinking, because when I thought of WoW Radio, I did think it was, and I was explaining this to people on stream before, going, look, I didn't listen to WoW Radio, but I always got the impression it was kind of like something you listened to in a browser or something, and I wasn't too sure how it all worked. But anyway, well, there you go. The OG of, on a technicality of World of Warcraft podcasting, you're in the house. It's one of those things where, do you remember roughly the date of your first broadcast?
July 3rd, it'd be 2005.
Wow. And still going all these years later, obviously.
Yeah, we took a break, during, Draenor because I hated it. And I just did. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I freaking hated that expansion. And every week it was just harder and harder to be enthusiastic about a game that I just didn't play, didn't care about. And, I stopped playing. So then when Legion came out, I got into the alpha and I loved it. I was like, oh, I love this. Now I got to podcast about it. I'm going to bring the show back. But I literally just ended the show. I just ended it. And I was ready to just walk away from it right then and there. Okay. And then Legion came out.
Okay. Now, Ro, turning to you, obviously you are a legend in the podcasting scene in these Blizzard products that you cover, what you do with Realm Maintenance, and obviously a variety of other podcasts that you appear on as well. Just to give people a little bit of an introduction to yourself, if for some reason they haven't come across your work yet, how long have you been in the game now?
I've been podcasting with the Realm Maintenance podcast since August of 2012. It'll be 7 years this August, and been playing the game since Burning Crusade. I joined playing WoW about right before Zul'Aman came out, and had been listening to podcasts about WoW since the beginning of Wrath of the Lich King, and started podcasting during the time between Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria, where I felt like for really kind of the first time since I started playing the game that I was starting to get a little bit bored with it, and I was looking for something different to do. And the Mist beta was something, but I was just looking for something to take it up another notch. And having listened to as many podcasts as I listened to, I figured I'd kind of dip my toes into that whole domain. I started doing segments for a couple podcasts, and then people liked what they heard from me, and they said, you should do your own show. And I decided what better thing to do than, since there, at the time, there was like around 30, 40 different podcasts covering World of Warcraft. There were enough podcasts to do a podcast about them. And this is, I thought I was the first one to come up with that idea. Far from it. There were definitely people before me. Sayomara Vesper, who was one of the curators of that wiki that you had mentioned earlier on. He did a show called Grand Old Podcast, which interviewed a lot of the older creators from the earlier days, say WoW Radio and the first podcast, like Tavern Cast and such like that. But yeah, it's been such a journey. It's been an amazing ride. I never would have thought I'd be doing this for close to 7 years now.
And I must add as well, obviously, the listeners will know that I went to BlizzCon last year, traveled all the way over from Sydney for it. And Ro was an absolute sweetheart to me the entire time I was at BlizzCon. If I had any troubles, believe me, I had many troubles and I wasn't sure where to go or what to do, I would simply message Ro or come across him in the lobby and he would help me out. And Ro, I haven't really had a chance to thank you since then for that, but you were an absolute angel at BlizzCon for me for my first time. And again, just thank you. It really meant the world to me. So you're, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's my pleasure, and I know that was your very first BlizzCon, and there's nothing, as with many things in life, there's nothing quite like your first time. Yeah. So I was happy to share what knowledge I had, and especially considering that at that time, at least as far as my knowledge of the situation with podcasting back then, you were the only podcast that I was aware of that had this focus on World of Warcraft Classic. And it's great to see that since that time, there have been other creators that have stepped up, YouTube content creators, other podcasts, like our fellow guest today. And it's great to see it expanding. It's weird because I thought that there was definitely room for one or two podcasts about Classic, but as time has gone on and you see more and more people are getting interested in it, it's like, it's almost kind of echoing, I feel like it's kind of echoing how things were back in the beginning. And it's kind of cool that, Mike is here to relate to it, because I would say when you started, Mike, like those first few months, would you agree that like for at least the first 6 months, it was pretty much just a handful of podcasts that were covering WoW, and it didn't blow up until a bit later?
So we started in July. So that means, let me see, Uncle Thursday show. I'm going to get the order wrong. There was Uncle Thursday show. Then there was Tavern Cast. Then there was, Wowcast. There's Alachia's show. And then the Instance.
The Instance and Control Out WoW, I think, appeared around the same time.
Yeah. So I think, so there were those 5. And, that's what I remember.
Yeah, and it was like that for about the good part of, from what I would see, about the first year of WoW's life, and then once it just started becoming this real big mainstream thing, it exploded from there.
Well, what happened was I got into podcasting because I wanted to do something because I was in radio. And then, but it was radio as a hobby in college, but I loved it, but I didn't love it enough to make it a career. It just wasn't my thing. But there was no other way, because it was cost prohibitive to do anything on the internet back then. And then podcasting came along. I'm like, oh, I really want to do this. And so I did. Funny story that my first hosting, charged me $2,200 for my first month.
What?
But I found a clause in their own TOS that said that if it goes over your allotment, that you will get an email. They never sent me an email, so they never charged me.
Oh, wow.
So, so that actually happened. But like now anybody and their mother can do a podcast, which is great. But, those early days were a lot of fun, and we're making it up as we went.
I can imagine it would have been the wild, wild west back then for sure. But, Ro, as you mentioned, more and more classic podcasts are popping up, and that's a great segue to our other guests here who have just recently dived in the waters. And Alan, I'll start with you and then we'll throw over to Anthony. You guys, I think it's been all of 2 or 3 months for you now?
Yeah, I think we started in February.
Okay. And basically, Anthony, I'll ask you this one. Diving into the waters as you have and seeing sort of the podcasting landscape before you as rookies, as relative newbies to the scene, were you a bit daunted at all jumping in, or were you, as I say, as Ro mentions, is it, well, there's not that many classic podcasts, let's give it a go?
Well, I think I'm a slightly unique case when it comes to talking about classic World of Warcraft, because on our show, I'm the resident noob in the fact that I've never really played World of Warcraft. So I honestly didn't really know, what the scene was like. Like, I had heard your podcast, that was actually the very first World of Warcraft in general podcast I ever heard. Alan and I were going back to the office from lunch one day, and your podcast was on his car. I'm like, they have podcasts about World of Warcraft? He's like, yeah. And then I started listening to your show. And then shortly after that, we started to get into, our own show and whatnot. But at least for me, because I was so far removed from the kind of Warcraft scene that it wasn't really daunting at all. I was just like, okay, people are making podcasts. We can, I guess, make a podcast. It was just kind of taking the conversations we'd have at our office and, get the kind of funny jokes and all that stuff, and just putting them in front of a microphone.
Yeah.
Is this your very first podcast altogether?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you sort of doing it with the panache that you have, because, I mean, as you say, I would have looked at it and been like, if some drunken Australian can do it, then we can do it. So, Alan, I'll ask you, did you have any kind of experience with any of this stuff at all? You've heard how Star Mike said he had a background in college radio. Had you dabbled with anything like this before?
Absolutely not. I listen to a ton of podcasts, at the office, I could just have podcasts running in the background all the time. I would listen to both of these guys' shows, Rolling Restart, I've listened to for a long time. World of Warcraft, I've listened to forever. Mike, El Renata, I said hi.
Oh, I will. We're recording tomorrow.
Big fan of hers too. But, so I'm naturally curious about anything. So when I listen to all these podcasts, I'm like, man, I wonder what goes into this. So I started looking it up, figured out how this stuff happens. And Anthony and I just started talking a lot about Classic once the announcement came out. So I said, hey, let's do a Classic WoW podcast. And we both said, all right, let's do it.
Well, once you started actually doing it, are there any things that stand out to mind about, things that were a bit trickier than you may have envisioned as you started recording, as you started publishing, or as you started conceiving the show? Maybe Ro and Star Mike will get a kick out of some of the hurdles that you may have crossed already in the first few months.
Yeah, I think the very first one we recorded, it was, the biggest hurdle was how the hell do we do a multi-track recording?
Yep.
So we both got our mics, we got everything, we can talk in Discord, everything sounds great, but how do we get multi-track recording working? So that was the biggest hurdle right off the top.
I'll tell you a fun story about Countdown to Classic. My filthy secret that no one knows about. I don't do multi-track recording.
I know. I see that in your Discord or in your Twitch streams.
That's right. I'd like to live dangerously. So I know it's the biggest rookie maneuver of all time. But Anthony, one thing I'm really interested in, because this will tie back into my next question for Mike, is you mentioned that, you actually haven't played the game that much and you're diving into the podcast more as a bit of an education project for yourself as you are excited to play Classic when it comes out. Were you daunted at all by jumping on a microphone, putting your thoughts out there to the world? Because I know this is something that I've had to wrestle with as well, in terms of me not being exactly the most knowledgeable player out there, but still being a passionate one. Were you daunted by the fact that you weren't sure what you might say on the topic, or have you found it still engaging to just be able to sit down and talk about this topic at length with the assistance of Al?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So, for everyone who's listening who hasn't heard about my Warcraft experience, I've played a very, very tiny bit of the Burning Crusade. Like I got to maybe the lower 30s, and that was basically it. So I've never played vanilla WoW. I've basically never really played World of Warcraft. So I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. Right. So how do I talk about that on a podcast? That's a wonderful question. So I would think at the beginning, yeah, there definitely was some nerves or some sort of trepidation. How the heck am I supposed to fill, 30 minutes of talking about World of Warcraft? So at the very beginning, our kind of plan was just, break it down to the essentials. What are we playing? Talk about our races and classes. And we kind of had some general kind of like educational stuff. But then I feel maybe our first 3 episodes, well, when we recorded them, I think we were very proud of them. But looking back, we've, I think, improved tremendously, which I'm sure is true for basically anyone who does a podcast or anything like that, right? But I think maybe around episode 4 or 5, I think we really started to find our competitive advantage, right? What can our podcast do differently than anyone else that would make us kind of distinct and unique? And honestly, we don't know that much about World of Warcraft. Alan actually played, in vanilla and whatnot, so he knows something. But I basically know nothing, right? So what's our competitive advantage? It's effectively just me and Alan, right? The two of us are talking, our synergy and all that stuff. So over time, I think we've become less of a World of Warcraft Classic podcast and became more of a comedy podcast focused around World of Warcraft, if that makes any sense. And that's just something that we've kind of grown about. And certainly we do still have kind of educational moments and talk about stuff, but we've definitely grown into our sort of voice overall. And then, once we kind of got there, we started getting some feedback and basically people, saying that, they really like the show. I mean, it's obviously one thing, talk to your friends, hey, listen to us, they say nice words. That's very nice of them, right? But we were getting stuff from people in Denmark, people, all around the world, right, including yourself, saying, that they really enjoyed our show. It's like, wow, people actually like us. It's kind of amazing. And that just kind of filled us with a little bit of positive energy, positive vibes,
I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have when they're first starting out making a podcast is that there's certain rules, certain format, certain things that you should do that every other podcast does. And I fell into that trap a little bit myself. And what I kind of learned over time as I was doing the show is that it's okay to break the norm. It's okay to break the rules, because quite honestly, if you do the show the way you want to do it, you're going to have more fun doing it. And if you have more fun doing it, that just carries over in your attitude and your excitement for the show. And then that also carries over into what your listeners are hearing.
I want to amend that. First off, I just want to say that usually it takes about 10 episodes before you get your groove. So it sounds like you guys are on track, and that's awesome. But to sort of say something about what Ro just said, when we first started out, because nobody's really done this before, we started getting emails from people saying, you're doing it wrong. I'm like, well, wait, I can swear on this show, can I?
Absolutely.
Yes. I was like, fuck you. We're doing it wrong. How are you telling me we're doing it wrong when nobody else is fucking doing it? Like, what is wrong? So I would get emails from people like, your show is too long. A podcast should only be 30 minutes. Can I say it again? Fuck you. Like, no, it's like the show is as long as it needs to be. It's like, if like at the time when I was working with Lindy, it's like, we don't script anything, but we would write out notes. And so like, if it takes an hour and a half to go through this, that's how long it's going to take. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. There was nowhere somewhere else at the time, but not until a few months later. I think Uncle Thursday was the next one. But point is, I'm trying really hard not to be like bragging about it, but you're right. It's like, you got to define what makes you happy.
Mike,
you got to define your show.
Well, the thing with runtime that has always shocked me is, if you are a somewhat naturally chatty person, time flies. Like, we're already 33 minutes into this call, and I feel like we just started. And
you got to end the podcast right here.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah, done. It's over. Sorry. Thanks for coming, guys. It's been great talking to you. Yeah, see you later. As rules dictate. But yeah, I mean, I'm finding that I'm doing 3 hours a week now, and it's once you get talking, the time absolutely flies, and you take 4 or 5 calls that take, half an hour each or what have you. And it spills out, and you look at the watch and you go, holy shit, we've been talking for quite a while now. Like, didn't feel like that. And if you're chatty, it's easy. It's fun. Mike, did you find that runtime was ever sort of, as you say, you threw away that half an hour rule or what have you? Were you finding that things were progressing to the point you're like, oh fuck, the episode is going 2 hours now. Where did the time go?
Oh, well, we never had a rule. I mean, maybe we just like sort of shot for an hour. I think because, like, if you think about it, just the intro and the outro alone would eat up 5 minutes. Now you've got 25 minutes to do something. So we just talked.
Yeah.
But it was more about, like, in the beginning, it was more like, well, here's our list of, like, what do we do this week? By the time I started playing in February of 2005, because I was an EverQuest junkie. So I was playing EQ2 for a while, and then that sucked. But by the time I started the show, I think I was in my 30s, or maybe I was in my early 40s. So it was easy to talk about, like, this dungeon is new. And the thing is that the whole point of doing Warcast in the first place was, how do you tell people, or how do you help people play a better game? That was the whole premise of the show. And so I would just write down a whole bunch of stuff, and you don't want to miss anything out. You want to, like, if your job, lowercase j, so to speak, is to help people, then you don't want to leave anything out. And so you just keep talking. And then there are shows that will just like run on, just because first the tangents come in, and then you're talking about stuff. And, now that we've been doing the show forever, it was like, remember when? So no, we never stuck to a time. I remember the first time we did a show that was like an hour and a half. And then the first time we did a show that was 2 hours. And it just didn't feel like there was anything wrong with it.
Mike, can I ask, obviously hearkening back to what Anthony said about sort of being a relatively, noobish player with the actual game, if I can get you to cast your mind back to 2006 when the show started, what kind of a player were you? And were you worried that, I'm just an average Joe kind of a player? Are people going to mind if I talk about the game to them?
It's an interesting point. I was playing games since they were invented. So like, the first game I played was Pong, so I'm that old. I had already been playing EverQuest, and I was playing EverQuest 2. So I knew my way around an MMO. So what kind of player was I? I was a kind of player, I like to find out every little nook and cranny about what the game was about. And I don't mean like physically like wandering around Ashenvale or something like that, but it's like what hidden things do people not understand? Sort of like like Elitist Jerks was. Like, how can we squeeze the most out of this game? So that's sort of where I was coming from at the time. And I was raiding too. I was raiding. Our guild, well, when I finally settled on a raiding guild, a good one, we went halfway through Nax, and I honestly do not remember if everybody burned out or if we just stopped or what, but we got halfway through and that was it.
Okay. Well, if you're getting halfway through Nax back in vanilla, I can assure you were definitely more of an elite player. So
yeah, I just cannot remember if the guild just decided to quit or if I decided to quit. I just really don't remember.
Now, Ro, piggybacking off of that, with what you do with realm maintenance and, it covers such a broad spectrum of, obviously you're talking about other podcasts, but you still kind of have to have a bit of a knowledge base of all of these Blizzard products. Have you found that you've ever been felt the looming specter of gatekeeping over your head in terms of, people will want a requisite amount of knowledge about game X or game Y if I'm going to talk about the podcast that talks about it? Or have you always sort of felt, relieved of those shackles where it's like, no, people just want to hear someone talk friendly about a topic and it doesn't matter how much knowledge I have of it?
I think when doing a podcast that involves interviewing people that do podcasts about other games, it helps to definitely have, some degree of familiarity with those games. And it kind of comes through in my interviews with podcasters for World of Warcraft and Hearthstone fairly well because I play those games a lot. When I interview podcasters from, say, Overwatch Podcast or Heroes of the Storm, while I've played both of those games and I've enjoyed both of those games, my hours played with those games is far less in comparison to, WoW and Hearthstone. So it's definitely kind of a different feel for the interview, but my show's I would say my show's very different from, say, what Mike does in World of Warcast, whereas while there's like one segment of realm maintenance that has me talking about, my personal opinion about X, Y, and Z, the bulk of the show is aimed more at the community and putting a spotlight on the people that I'm talking to. So when your show's kind of designed like that, when you're putting the emphasis on the people that you're having on the show, more so than you're putting it on yourself, it's easier to conduct those interviews and not worry too much about your own personal familiarity with those games, because what you're trying to do is find out what is this person's familiarity with the game, what's their take on it. So it just kind of goes to show how there's such a wide spectrum, a whole lot of flavors of how podcasts can come in. And just hearing about this Casual Classic podcast that these two gentlemen are doing, I find it so fascinating that here we have one co-host who has played next to no World of Warcraft, awaiting the launch of World of Warcraft Classic. And that's an interesting hook for me. I mean, that's something that makes me want to really listen to this podcast, because when we talk about WoW Classic, I almost think that there's this assumption that anyone who's going to play WoW Classic obviously played it before.
No, it's definitely something that's starting to pop up now. We are starting to hear from more and more people saying, hey guys, nice to meet you. I didn't play vanilla WoW, but I want to try out WoW Classic. I'm really excited for it. So it's great to have a voice to put to that sort of, part of the community that weren't there back in the day that are really keen to get in on it now. So Anthony definitely brings that to the table. Alan, I'll just ask this of you. Now, you've heard, obviously, Mike has been doing this forever. Ro has been doing this since 2012, I believe he said. It's been a long time. Now, you guys are 3 months into it. when you hear people say, years and years worth of shows are behind their podcasts, how does that make you feel going forward? Like, what's the plan for Classic Casual?
From my side, we're going to continue to do it as long as it's fun. I'm not trying to make money from it. I'm not trying to make it anything other than just me and Anthony having fun. We talk about this stuff at work. We talk about all sorts of things at work. We have a ton of fun, a lot of laughs. That's the only reason I'm doing it. So when that stops, I'll stop. But until then, I'm going to have fun.
Anthony, piggybacking off of that, is Alan not talking about the 15-year contract he had you sign before you started?
That's true. I think it's actually 20 years and there is no benefits.
Right.
So it's a rough deal.
Yeah. Okay. No medical.
Everything's registered in my name anyway, so.
That's true.
It's a kid.
Mike.
You can have it all, Anthony.
Mike, I'll come back to you and just a couple of intriguing questions that I've got. Can you think of, over the years, and obviously many, many, many episodes of World of Warcast, what are some of the memories that really stand out in your mind? Do you have highlights? Do you have lowlights? Do you have episodes that were lost in a big, mistake? Oh no, I can't believe I deleted that, or anything that stands out?
I haven't deleted anything. As a matter of fact, I just started backing up a whole bunch of stuff. Although I might have intentionally deleted some like old. I think I kept 1 to 10. And I'm not talking about the MP3s. I mean like the project files. I think did I delete them? Maybe I did. I don't know. But if I deleted them, I deleted them intentionally. So no, I haven't deleted anything accidentally. Everything is either there by design or not. Let me see. Meeting people at BlizzCon for the first time was a lot of fun because let me see. The first BlizzCon I went to, I think maybe it was 2008, and so I had already it's like Molly and Scott and Nicole and just like all these other podcasters that were around at the time, and we're all just like hanging out because we're like the first class.
Yeah.
I mean, like we're the first class.
You're the first ones doing it, the first graduates.
Yeah, we're the first ones doing it. So we're all just like buddies.
Yeah.
Because we all like every single one of us that was doing podcasts at the time, we all came up with the same idea from different parts of the world. Patrick, doing that, Randy, like all these amazing people, and we still keep in touch.
Well, if I can interrupt, if I can interrupt, Mike, I
Yeah.
just want to grab you because you just mentioned the name Randy, and that's a name that will ring out to a lot of the classic fans, whether they know it or not, because it's recently come out, because he's only just recently popping up on the forums in blue, that we've got Randy Jordan, obviously old co-host of the Instance podcast many, many years ago, who's now popping up as Kyvax on the forums, and he's been assigned Classic, so he's now the World of Warcraft Classic community manager. And it's amazing.
It's so weird. Because like the last time I spoke to him, I said, I forgot who, but I think one of us is going to buy the other one a round of whiskey. And I don't remember. So anyway, after the, unfortunate, loss of some employees, recently, I started seeing Randy's name in the Classic forum. I was like, oh, that's funny. You still have to behave yourself in the Classic forums, but still funny. But yeah, Randy, is well known in Classic circles, as not the original co-host of the Instance. I don't even remember who the first one was, but he was the second one.
Right.
And yeah.
I must admit, I get a kick out of a podcaster being the voice to the community for Classic now. So it's a bit of fun. Mike, before I turn back to Alan and Anthony to sort of round this one out, I figured I'd best take the opportunity to sort of say, what are your thoughts in general on the growth of World of Warcraft podcasting over the years? We've heard about how you were there from, almost the beginning, and here you still are standing 14 years later, from the release of the game. 13 years later from the start of World of Warcast. You've been sitting back, you've been watching the scene develop. What's your thought on the history of WoW podcasting?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I always feel that people should do any podcast about any topic, no matter how many other podcasts there are out there, because any show is going to be based from a different point of view. That said, I think that first off, I think it's great that people are sharing their experiences about the show. The only thing that I'm going to sound like a jerk with saying this, but there are certain episodes of certain podcasts that I started listening to that I couldn't, not because of I curse like a sailor. That doesn't bother me at all, but there are certain words that people use. I'm like, no, I don't like that. And what I mean by that is like there's a certain like gamer culture that I feel is sneaking in a little bit, which I really don't like.
I think I know what you're talking about.
I dislike that.
Is that in fairness, I totally see where you're coming from with that. The retort to that people might say is like, oh, here's Mike, here's his get off my lawn moment. But I don't think it is that. I think there's a bit more to it in terms of there is a culture shift for sure starting to peak out.
But you have anybody who says that has to remember that came from radio. So, saying the word shit was just like impossible. You just couldn't do it. And I chose to do that. So, and not to mention I was 15 years younger when I was doing this in the first place. Yeah. So, the whole get off my lawn thing just doesn't work because I was, Ren and I was just saying jokingly the other day is like when we first started doing the show, we were in our 30s. So I just don't feel that way. I think there's just a certain level of respect that people should have for others.
Yeah.
I don't like seeing that shift. And then there was, I don't remember exactly what game it was, but there was a video that was floating around, I think early in the week, about how people were speaking on, I think it might have been Xbox Live, maybe. I don't remember, but I couldn't even hit play on it because I just didn't want to hear it.
Right.
But apart from that, I feel that, I would never ever tell anybody to not do a podcast. I would, as a matter of fact, I would just like help anybody. But I would say don't be disillusioned if you feel like you're a little drowned. Just do your thing and people will find you. So.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Very well said. Alan, to finish up on this one, having heard the stuff that you've heard from Mike and Ro in this call, has this changed any of your thoughts in your plans moving forward, or has it just solidified sort of your conviction to the cause, if you will?
No, I think it's solidified our conviction. Like you said, if you look around the classic community now, there's a lot of YouTubers, a lot of other places you can get information. It's kind of an echo chamber for the most part. So for us, we didn't want to do a podcast that just said the same things as those other guys. We took a casual approach. I'm an older man now. I have a family. So I'm going to be playing the game a lot more casually. So just fleshing that out and talking about what the experience I'm going to have coming up versus last time I played when I was way more serious. I think we're just going to stick on that path. I will. I don't know about Anthony. Anthony can answer for himself, but I think the path we've taken is the right one for us.
Anthony?
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't think there's been any major revelations, but it's good to hear that we're not doing anything terrible. But I just have to say, like, after doing this for I don't know, maybe 3 months or so now, like each time we do this, I think I get more and more entertainment and enjoyment out of doing it. And I think as long as, that keeps going, I'll be happy to keep making episodes and pumping out content as long as we can.
Alan just mentioned something that I did mean to get your thoughts on. We're getting, podcasts per se, come across many different mediums now. And one of them is YouTube. And you see these YouTube shows and they're only produced on YouTube going, here's a podcast for you. I'd love to get your take on that particular medium and how it's changed up the game and what your view on them is.
I have such an opinion on this.
Yeah, Ro, I'd love to hear it because let me just introduce you to this one again, because I was just going to interject and say, because we're seeing the rise of the Twitch podcast or the YouTube podcast that isn't published anywhere else, and it's just on those formats. And so, Ro, please do jump in with any thoughts you might have with that change in culture.
I feel like the old man saying get off my lawn when it comes to Twitch and YouTube only podcasts. I've finally not too long ago surrendered to the fact that there are going to be shows that are done exclusively on YouTube or exclusively on Twitch, and they're going to call themselves podcasts. I feel like that's not a podcast to me. I feel like that's a show presented on video. I don't know. I'm weird when it comes to that. But the only thing, unless the show is designed in such a way where it really doesn't carry itself well in audio only, because you use like video elements in the background to explain things, or you use graphics and such like that. I can understand why a show that uses a lot of heavy video stuff may decide not to do present their show in an audio format that's available to download. But there are so many shows that I have come across, quite in a few in the Blizzard sphere of things, where it's just like almost any other audio podcast, except you can see the faces. They're talking about stuff. They're not really doing anything special video-wise, except you can see their faces. And they don't do anything to put their show out in a format that can be digested on the way to work, or, you know, in your morning commute, or while you're doing stuff in game and WoW. And as someone who curates audio podcasts or curates podcasts in general, that just, it's one of those things that just kind of irritates me. If you do a YouTube podcast or a Twitch podcast, I implore you, please consider putting an audio format out there for the rest of us.
No, it's just definitely something that I wanted to cover off on, and I'm so glad that you had such a strong opinion on that one, Ro, because I do see it happening more and more often, and as I say, it's that old school versus new school, and, you know, each to their own, but I'm glad that we got some comments on that. And look, guys, with that, we're coming right up on the hour mark now. I'm gonna say my big thank yous to you guys. Mike, you have been amazing. It's been such a pleasure meeting you, and you've been everything I thought you would be and more, and I just want to say thanks for coming on the show. Maybe we've lost Mike. I tell you what, I'll do this.
No.
Oh, you still there, Mike? No, Ro? It's all right.
No.
Ro, I'll say my thank you to you. Ro, as I said, it was such a pleasure meeting you at BlizzCon, and it's been so great being able to have you on my show after you threw out a lovely invitation all that time ago when I was, you know, the show was nothing, and you invited me on Realm Maintenance, and I was touched. And I just want to say thanks for taking the time now for Countdown to Classic.
It's my pleasure. I mean, at the end of the day, the primary reason why I do what I do with, at least with Realm Maintenance, is because I am trying to spread awareness of all these different podcasts that are covering World of Warcraft, that are covering all Blizzard games, because there are larger podcasts out there. There are podcasts that, you know, people are far more aware of, or just a bit more mainstream, that they just reach more people because the people behind them know how to do stuff. But the smaller podcasters out there, I think, have opinions that are just as valid, just as worthy of being heard. And there's podcasts of all shapes and sizes, of all different opinions. And it's my pleasure to spread more awareness so that people know that they exist and get connected to them. And what you've done with Countdown to Classic has been nothing short of amazing, and I'm really looking forward to checking out the Casual Classic as well, or the Classic Casual rather as well, and see those guys take on it.
And Ro, before I let you go, I'm going to sort of, you know, I'm not sure if you're the kind of person that is happy to give yourself a plug, but I'll do it for you. Find Ro at realmmaintenance.com. So realm-maintenance.com, I should say, and check out his podcast. Ro, where else can people find you?
Easiest way would be to find me on Twitter at Rowow. That's RHOWOW. Realm Maintenance is a podcast about all podcasts that cover Blizzard games. If you are just interested in World of Warcraft, that is the main retail World of Warcraft game, you can check out the Rolling Restart podcast. That's specifically on WoW. And if you happen to play Hearthstone, I also do a Hearthstone podcast called Hearth Casual. You can check me out on either of those shows as well.
Very good. Alan, Anthony, thanks so much, guys. Look, I made you a promise a couple of months ago, and I said I dig what you're doing. If you make it to episode 10, I will have you on the show. You made it. Here you are. You guys have been excellent, and you did it. You did it. So look, guys, give yourselves a big plug. Where can people find you?
Go ahead, Anthony.
All right.
I can never nail the plugs.
I was about to say, yeah, this is usually my job. So if you would like to listen to our podcast, we are called The Classic Casual. We can reach us at theclassiccasual@gmail.com. Twitter, Classic Casual with the number 1. Like if you were to hit the shift key and press it, it'd be an exclamation mark. I think we own the domain name for our show, but it's not like active yet. So if you're in the far future, you can go to theclassiccasual.com, but it does not exist yet. So congratulations. Yeah, we are a relatively lighthearted, World of Warcraft classic podcast. I think we are the podcasting equivalent of Danny DeVito in the film Junior. So if that sounds interesting, please give us a listen.
All right. And I'll add on there, guys. You know, obviously Countdown to Classic talks classic. We're not the only classic podcast out there. The Classic Casual will absolutely scratch an itch that Countdown cannot. So please go and support the guys and check out Alan and Anthony over at the Classic Casual. And Mike, we might have you back now. Are you with us?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, but did you get my note? I had to run out for just like 1 second.
Oh, no, that's fine, mate. That's fine. You missed all the horrible things I said about you, so it's probably for the best.
I am Star Mike on Twitter, World of Warcast on Twitter, and worldofwarcast.com.
Not a worry. Now, Mike, I will repeat what I said. I said thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. You were everything I thought you would be and more. It's been such a delight talking to you. And, you know, I'd really love to stay in touch with you guys, all of you, and obviously be able to check in and say hello every now and again. But Mike, thanks so much for doing this. And, you know, you didn't know.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. You didn't know me. You didn't know anything about me. I just approached you as a random, and you were so good with the invite, and you've been fantastic. So I just want to say thanks.
Oh, I heard of your show. It's just I am now that I have a longer commute, I've been listening to a lot more podcasts. Which sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier, is like, you know, when I sit down on my computer, I focus on one thing. So but now I'm listening to a lot more, so I'll have all the shows in my rotation.
And that's the show for today, everyone. But be sure to tune in next week as we have even more calls for you. So tune in then for more Countdown. Before we go, though, let's go through some thank yous, and a big thank you, as always, to patrons. AeroPC, Anti, Binger, Brandon K, Callum F, Chunky Dunk, Connor C, Damien A, Dave K, David F, DJ M, Dufficus, Hurlbert, James S, Jamie S, John HC, Josh W, Minoru, Randall H, Rasmus S, Rarebit, Rick S, Ryan K, Schmige, Sylvia K, Tim B, Tim S, Torbjorn C, Voiquora, and Zudamos. And of course, the very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic, an extra special shout out and thank you from the bottom of my heart to Alice R, Billy C, Daniel K, Eddie S, Eric S, Firespittin' Kitten, Flosy B, Freaky Fritz, Ida B, Batlord, Carl W, Nick B, Palfurus, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be the same without your support, and we probably wouldn't be on the air, so thank you. That's it for today. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. I'll see you all next time.